Soft beeping from my work alarm woke me in the morning. The same sound as always, a pulsing of noise that was like a heartbeat. Over the years, I had grown used to the noise signifying another day at the station. I was positive about my lack of work, but I could just feel some new and horrific case would be looming over me soon. Turning my clock off to prevent it from waking my slumbering wife, I pulled myself out of bed and got dressed. I had breakfast and I read the news. Old cases printed on the cover. Almost in sync with my need to get up and head over to the station, a knock came at my door. I'm back to the grind, I hummed as I kicked my shoes on. Upon opening the door, I found my work partner, a spry woman in her late 30s with curly red hair pulled back into a ponytail. She wore a light brown coat and a sweet smile. "Morning, Harrison," she chirped before pushing a coffee into my hands. "The boys want you over at Saints Lane apartment block. Seems that they found a body." I took the coffee from her, same one that she always gave me every day, and I sipped it. It's about time we got some more work. Smiling, I closed the front door and headed to her car. Sharon Whittingham, to give her full name, was a detective like me. I trained her and was expecting her to move to a new city once she was trained, since she had the skills to go far. But she, like most people who live here, stayed. Within a half an hour we had arrived. The complex that we found ourselves at was the kind people tell of in ghost stories. Old, damp, and half empty. It was once a low-cost housing project from about 50 years ago, but the only thing it kept after countless contractors had pulled out was the low cost. A few squad cars were already outside, the lights flicking on and off rhythmically. From what Sharon had told me, we knew the body was that of a young male about 23 years old. We were trying to hunt for his family, but as yet didn't have many leads. I ran through the notes in my head as we ascended the 4 flights of stairs up to room 307. Yellow and black tape was hung about the place, stopping the other dozen residents on the complex from getting in. The door had been broken in by our own forces in an attempt to see what the source of these foul smells in the complex was. Little had been disturbed in the apartment itself. A few things like pillows were on the floor, but nothing to suggest a struggle. Sharon headed into the bedroom of the apartment and nodded her head towards the body. Grimly, I followed her in. There, lying naked on the bed, was a young man with black hair, green eyes, and a few studs. His body was a mess. Most of his chest had been pulled open and the lungs and heart partially removed, clawed out by long nails. Though his death looked horrific, the young man had a peaceful look on his face. "What a sorry sight," I commented, walking over to the body to take a closer look at the wound in his chest. "That's what I said." Sharon nodded, looking around the bedroom. "This case looks like an odd one. I mean, just look at this room. It's immaculate, not a thing out of place. It doesn't look like there was a struggle to me." I nodded in agreement before looking at the man's side table to inspect it for clues. I pulled some gloves on and started to leave through his possessions. "Has anybody reported hearing a disturbance here in the past few weeks?" "No, the kid hardly made any noise, it seemed. He had moved in a few years ago. Didn't go out much or have many people over." "Do we have a name?" Yeah, I think so. We called himself Joshua Brown. He was working close by, at a restaurant as a waiter." "I see." I moved back from the small bedside cabinet, making note of a framed photo by the lamp. The image was of a boy, Joshua, in his late teens with another boy with long white hair, snowy skin, and a pink jumper. They looked happy together. Just as I was about to stand, I noticed a few empty packets of contraceptives on the floor. I picked them up carefully, and I placed them into a clear plastic bag before showing them to Sharon. "Do you think he knew his killer?" Sharon eyed me for a moment. She always said that I had an odd way with words. Well, he could have done it with his killer before he met his maker, so to speak. She pondered for a moment before spotting the photograph. If we look at it from that angle, it's totally plausible. We should try to see who he knew, who his friends and lovers were. Unless it was a one-night stand, of course. I nodded and wandered around the room some more. Get someone to look into his phone records, a computer, and whatever other communication devices that he has. That'll be a good first lead. We should also be able to get some DNA from this place if we need to identify. You talk like such an old man sometimes, Sharon smiled. If we get this to court, we should be able to prove who did it. We just need to find the one who did the deed. I stifled a chuckle. You talk like a teenager sometimes, Sharon. I knew full well that my comeback had no effect. Let's hope we can get whoever did this. As if we ever let them get away. I smiled at her optimism and I continued my search. As expected, a good number of DNA samples were recovered and sent off to the lab, while Sharon and I spoke to his neighbors to see if anybody knew Joshua. They all said the same thing. As far as they knew, he was a very quiet lad, though his appearance may have suggested otherwise. He was kind, didn't talk about himself or his family too much. We were still finding it hard to get in contact with his parents, or the boy in the photo, whoever that was. The few photos around Joshua's flat were almost all of the albino teenager, and we guessed that they had probably been partners at some point. Working on that assumption, we had started to construct a story that the two had probably split up or moved apart, but had met up again recently, and the albino had, after intercourse, killed Joshua. It was a little flimsy, but we had to start somewhere. It was long after 11 that night that I finally took a taxi home. In the heat of the moment, I had lost myself in work and I had lost all track of time. Only when I saw that it was so late did I at last leave. I arrived home and was met by my darling wife. Even now, 43 years after first meeting her at college, she hasn't lost her looks in my eyes. Even after she had her first stroke, I still loved her looks. They do say that love is blind after all. Good evening, love, I said with a soft voice. You could say that me and my wife Annabelle were the ideal model of what an old married couple should be, still as close as ever. Though I now had a full head of silver hair, I hadn't retired. After my wife's first stroke, she had wanted our lives to stay the same. She stayed at home and rested while I went to work. I loved my work and the money that it brought in helped to pay for the medical bills. Evening, my wife replied after a short pause. How was work today? I embraced her and smiled, not giving her an answer other than a happy moan. Annabelle hugged me back smiling. I hated telling her about my work, the death that I saw, so I hid it from her. For the rest of the evening, we simply ate dinner and watched TV, before falling asleep at about 1 a.m. The next day started the same. My alarm started softly to raise me from my slumber, and then I left to greet Sharon. She filled me in on some of the developments that had happened since we last spoke. The body had been moved from the apartment, and we were now free to do a deep search. Joshua's laptop had been found and was in the lab, being pulled apart for information. I needed confirmation that nothing had been missed, so I rode with Sharon to the apartment. The place was quiet as we went in, the smell of damp stronger than ever now. On entering the apartment, we found that little was out of place, thanks to the hands of our experienced team. I started to look about, first going through the kitchen and then the living room, followed by the bathroom and then the bedroom, looking in more detail than I had before. I made a note that the kitchen was poorly stocked to feed 2 people, and that the only clothes there belonged to Joshua. Sharon and I quickly came to the same conclusion, that he was living alone at the time of his death. My gaze turned back to the bed. Most of the covers had been taken away, but there was still some dried blood on the mattress, outlined by tape to show where the body once lay. I looked at Sharon, who was rummaging through the dresser to the right of the small window that gave light to the room. On top of the dresser, there were a number of small trinkets, including a photograph of the albino boy, a freestanding cross with a rosary hung about it, and a copy of the Bible. "You see anything, Sharon?" I asked, slowly walking over to look over her shoulder. "Well, he was into his religion, but it looks normal enough." She pondered, tapping the side of her neck in thought. I nodded in agreement, coupling this with a small noise to signify that I thought she was indeed correct. "I would like to know who the albino boy is. He looks to be a bit of a theme here. A possible suspect. Can't be sure until we find him, but it's within reason." I picked up the photograph and I removed it from its frame. For a moment, I studied the image before noticing something as I held it to the light. Dark patches. Careful to not damage the deceased possessions, I turned the image over to see writing on the back. It read like a love letter, short, sweet, and simple. "It was sunny that day like the sun. You light up my day, my angel." I quoted aloud. Sharon looked back at me in puzzlement for a moment before realizing that I was reading something. "Is there something on the back of the photograph?" With a nod, I handed over the image. No name, sadly. Like me, Sharon studied the writing. At least we know now that the two of them were dating. A bit tacky if you ask me. I chuckled. When you find love, you'll learn that there is no such thing as tacky. "Oh, you know full well that I have no intention of finding love," Sharon responded flatly. She had explained to me before that she wasn't interested in any kind of relationship that wasn't a work of friend base. She had enjoyed her solitude. "Yeah, we'll see." I smiled back before going to inspect the other images. "Let's try and find the name of the albino boy. That's our first task." Sharon agreed before hunting about for more photos to see if any others had messages on the back. Sadly, we were out of luck. After collecting a few more of the young man's possessions, we headed back to the station to try to fit the links together and to wait in the labs to give us more information. It was past 4 when I got a call from the station's pathologist, a towering blonde-haired man we all lovingly called R. He was from Russia and had one of those very tricky names with a great number of K's and V's in it. He told us that he had news about the body and asked us to come over as soon as we could make it. I told Sharon and we headed over to his lab, all the way on the other side of town. R was a workaholic like me, and he often pulled all-nighters against his better judgment. We headed into the small clinic and were buzzed into the main lab by R's young receptionist. R greeted us at the entrance to his lab. His long blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail that often sat on his shoulder. His eyes were a soft blue and he wore a long white lab coat. On his right wrist, he had a small gold bangle which I had never seen him remove. His skin was very white and he often wore a somewhat blank expression, the kind that you see on the face of someone who's lived with death for many years. I saw myself in R sometimes. "Harrison, Sharon, glad you can make it over here so quickly." R smiled, holding out a hand. I took his hand and shook it. "Well, you know what we're like, eager to get things done. It's good to see you again." R had worked for us for about a year now. Before that, he was a GP, a very good and caring one too. But after a tragedy had struck his family, he had started to work here. Sharon also shook R's hand before heading towards his lab. R smiled in my direction to thank me for the pleasantries. I knew that he wasn't a talker. I followed and looked over to a metal table that presented the body of the victim, covered with a thin white sheet. What I found was pretty interesting, really. A bit of a sick case, though. the doctor commented, before pulling the cover down to reveal the upper half of the body, folding the cover just under the wound in his chest. "What do you mean?" Sharon asked, walking over to look while I had admired from afar. As I see it, his ribcage was pulled open and then most of the ribs were removed, followed by the consumption of the lungs and heart. There was a dumbfounded silence. "You mean somebody's eaten him?" Sharon shouted a little too loudly for R's liking, as he was very sensitive to sound. "Yes, eaten," R responded, a little agitated to have had Sharon shout at him. There were both large claw and bite marks on the remaining tissue. He signaled to a mouth-sized bite mark, consisting of many needle-like holes that was uncovered at the bottom of the ribcage. I felt a little bit ill just thinking about the notion of one human eating another. "Those aren't human though, I mean look at them," Sharon exclaimed as shocked as I was. "Well, these bites come in sets of 2 and they're the right proportion to be human. Say the one doing the eating had possession of some kind of adapted weapon. Humans are strange creatures, you know." R's eyes, peering over his glasses, remained on the body. I paused. He did have a point after all. Maybe this was a far more twisted story than I had first imagined. For the rest of the meeting, R filled us in on what else he had worked on about the body and he gave us his full report. After reading through the case notes, Sharon and I both headed home. Annabelle met me at the door and we chatted about our day, though I made sure to cut out as much of the dark information as I could. I picked at my dinner and avoided mention of food for most of the evening. Honestly, I was shaken by what R had told me, so much so that I could hardly respond to my wife. Around 10, I went to bed although I couldn't sleep. With the case on my mind, it was hard to think of anything else. Ideas rattled around my head. I arrived at the station by 7, a little early for me, but I felt like walking. There's something about walking to arrive before anyone else that's strangely enjoyable. By lunchtime, Joshua's journal was released from the labs with every page copied and recorded. Sharon went out again to ask around about the young man while I stayed put to read the journal. It was a few years old, but I thought it would still be in the right time span to possibly include information about the albino. I was right to assume that it would. The journal was nothing special. It went from the teen's 15th birthday and stopped at his 16th. It started with the boy describing what he got for his birthday: a phone, the book that he was writing in, and a few trinkets from one of his friends. He spoke highly of his friend, who I gather was known as Lyot. If Lyot was the name of the albino boy, then it should be easy enough to find him after all. There can't be too many kids named Lyot in the US. For the next few hours or so, I focused on nothing but the journal, making sure to take notes on pretty much everything about the teen's life that he wrote about. To my disappointment, there wasn't much of interest apart from a few briefly mentioned cases of bullying, some intimacy between the young Joshua and Lyot, and a few small social events that he and Lyot had attended. Joshua seemed to be very close to Lyot. He seemed to love him deeply, although it was mentioned that the boys never told their parents. The journal told of how Lyot was badly bullied at school and suffered depression as well as some other health problems. He took a lot of medications, an amount that I would consider to be unsafe. As the journal went on, things remained the same. The two lads to date in secret, and they kept their heads down at school to avoid attention. Slowly, I closed the journal with care before noticing that Sharon had come in. "Hey Harrison, how are the tricks?" she inquired, coming over with some lunch. Gladly, I took it from her. "Well, it looks like we have a name to match a face now. It seems from the journal that Joshua was dating a boy named Lyot, around the age of 16, and it looks like a long-term relationship to me." Sharon picked up the book and started to skim it along with my notes. I reckon we've got our suspect's name. Seems so. Well then, let's put it into the computer. Triumphantly, Sharon collected the notes from the desk before heading over to the computer. Though my old legs had fallen asleep from the long time sitting, I raised myself and headed after her. By the time that I arrived, Sharon had sat herself down at a computer and was punching in her login. Before long, our files were open and the hunt was on. As expected, it didn't take long at all, although what I saw filled me with disappointment. Wyatt Penhart, a white-haired male from a small town in Texas, was found guilty today of murder-suicide. The youngster, aged 17, shot dead his father, the town's resident priest, on Monday the 17th of February. The verdict of the court can now bring answers to those affected by the event. Sharon sighed deeply, reading aloud the article that was before her. Looks like we went down the rabbit hole in this one, Chief. I nodded, although I remained transfixed by the article. It was simple with little detail, but there was a mention of 3 older brothers, a mother in her 40s, and the cause of death for both Wyatt and his father. His father was shot in the chest and later died at a hospital while Wyatt had shot himself. Poor thing. Yup, back to square one it seems, Sharon commented. We'll find other leads, we can do this. I smiled, knowing this had probably knocked the wind out of Sharon's sails. She had this habit of sticking to one idea in a case and only gives up on it if she is proven wrong. I know. For a moment, she just pretended to read the article before stopping herself, leaning close to the screen. You reckon Joshua would have known Wyatt's brothers? What do you mean? Well, Joshua's boss told me that he was a bit of an introvert. He never really went out and hardly ever talked to anyone. Since the other residents in Joshua's complex never saw him with anyone, is it safe to assume that he knew the killer, since he wouldn't really invite a random stranger in? Say one of Wyatt's brothers came to town. Joshua offers them a place to stay and the rest is history. Sharon knew that herself that this could be a bit far-fetched, but I knew that she would look into it. Find the family then. See if we can get some more information, I suggested. Got it. On that, Sharon started to dig into our computers for more information about the family, while I simply went to work organizing the files for the case, hoping to see a fresh trail. I arrived home at 7 again that night. I greeted my lovely wife and sat with her at the dining table. Though her mind was sometimes muddled and she wasn't always entirely there, I could see that she was pretty excited today. Interested as to why this was, I slipped into conversation over our beef stew. How was your day then, Annabelle? I smiled, happy in the knowledge that she seemed better today than she had been in a long time. The doctors had warned of another stroke if she became stressed or was too active, so she often confined herself to the house, doing very little at all. It was as if she had been prescribed loneliness, but some days she was happy to live like this. Oh, my day was lovely, she smiled, looking up from her meal. A very nice boy came over today. He was collecting for charity. Did you give them anything? I asked back, knowing that my wife was a very generous person. Well, she said after a little pause. He was looking to collect clothes, so I gave him some of the shirts that are too small for you now, as well as some change. I tried to invite him in for cake and sandwiches. Her mind trailed off for a moment before she smiled. I had invited him in for tea, but when he came in, he didn't eat anything, though he did say that he was hungry. Odd boy. Often my wife would repeat her sentences, forgetting what she had just said. That's nice. I've been meaning to get rid of those shirts for a while now. I smiled. There was something about talking like this that always helped me get my mind off work. I allowed the conversation to continue until we had finished dinner and then we watched TV and went to bed, just like most nights. It was a simple lifestyle, but I wouldn't ask for any other. For the next few days, nothing happened of much note. All three Penhart brothers had alibis for the night of the murder, and so did the now single mother. Joshua's parents told us that their son hardly ever spoke to them, but they would come and collect his body soon. We found a few more leads, though they all ran cold sooner or later. The IT department was still working on the computer and the phone of the deceased. It was late. A few lights were on in the city, but I still burned the midnight oil, working through statement after statement of the young man. Every one of them said the same thing. Joshua never talked to anyone, never had anyone over, and pretty much never left his apartment, apart from when he went to work or went shopping. I was at a loss. Knock, knock. Hummed a familiar voice, baritone and tinted with accent. I looked up and saw R in the doorway, holding a few files. Like me, he was burning the midnight oil, though it was a little odd to see him in my office. I welcomed him in. "Evening, Doctor." R came in, sitting across from me at my desk before taking my notes to read over them. "Shouldn't you be at home with your wife now? Though I would love to, I'm at a loss here, R. I'm not the man that I was 30 years ago." He smiled. I watched him read over my notes before taking a look at the file that he had brought with him. "Didn't expect to see you here so late." "I wanted to hand over these notes. I've found some bits and bobs." He paused. "Where are you with the case?" I knew full well that R would not be willing to tell me anything about his finds unless I told him mine. He liked to trade information. It was one of his many odd tricks. "Well, we've closed the case and trying to find the albino kid. Turns out that our top suspect had been dead for years. We can't find any new leads. This job looks like it was done professionally, R, and I'm starting to wonder if we can solve it." I knew full well that I was putting it on thick, being a pessimist, but I wanted to go over the top. The albino kid. Sharon had mentioned him over some drinks, and she was so hyped up about finding the supposed killer so quickly. I didn't want to tell her. "Tell her what?" I asked in response. "Don't you know? I thought you looked into the Penhart incident." "No, I thought it was an open and shut case. Was it not?" R smiled knowingly. He always reveled in knowing things that others didn't. "No, not totally. The trial was a shambles. Evidence was lost, statements pulled out, and reports rejected. Originally, it was going to be presented as a case of retaliation, an act of self-defense, with the remaining parent standing trial for abuse, but it was not to be." Closing the files that he was reading, I watched a rather smug smile creep across the tall doctor's face. Lyatt's body went missing. I paused, half annoyed that I hadn't been told, but then also confused. Went missing. It sounded foolish, but R didn't usually lie. Yep. I knew the pathologist who was going to make an assessment of Lyatt's body before laying him to rest, but the night before she was going to make the report, the body just vanished, gone without a trace. "That's total fiction," I exclaimed. "A body can't simply get up and walk away." R nodded and then opened the file that he was going to deliver to me. "It's up to you whether you believe me or not. Me and some work friends called it the body snatcher." When opening the file, I saw some of the latest DNA traces found of Joshua's body, along with long strands of pure white hair. I couldn't think of what to say. I just sat silently looking at the report. The hair was about the right length and color to belong to the albinos, but how could that possibly be? "You're welcome," R hummed, standing up before leaving my office. Left alone with my thoughts, I felt my stomach turn over. I had seen the reports from the other crime scene, the boy lying in a pool of his own blood and brain tissue, clasping a small revolver in one hand. It could have been the lack of sleep. Things no longer added up in that case, and nothing made any sense to me. Theories buzzed and nagged at me. What if the death was faked? What if the body was stolen? What if? I stood up quickly, holding my head before groaning. "The dead don't walk around, Harrison. Get a grip." My lack of sleep was clearly apparent now. Pushing the files into my desk drawer I had at home, annoyed at R but also deeply puzzled. My alarm did little to wake me the next morning, although the pounding at my door did. Sharon, who was far too peppy for this time of day, had just gotten news that the laptop files had now been copied and were free to read. I hurriedly got myself dressed and then left to join her. On the way in, she told me that they had found a full electronic journal, with the last entry being the day of Joshua's death. She was hopeful that this could be our route to finishing the case. Even if it was lacking detail, it could shine some light on the story leading up to the young man's death. Sharon pretty much sprinted to my office where a hard copy of the journal had been placed. Instantly, she fumbled for the last entry. I, slower at my age, arrived just as she had found the page. Sitting down in my own chair, I took out a notepad and waited for Sharon to read what it said. Okay, March 26th. She paused to find her words before a very puzzled look crossed her face. What's wrong? I asked. Nothing, let me just read it. I could tell that she was composing herself, taking a breath. She started to read. I know that God must be smiling upon me, and my prayers have been answered and I have him back. Robbed from me, I had given up hope that we could be one again. But we will be. He doesn't know what he is now, but I don't care. He's an angel now. The moonlight shows his true form. It scared me at first, but I know this was meant to be. I'll become a part of him. I lie with him now as I type this. His skin is so cold and pure like snow. He's yet to wake up from last night. He bit him pretty badly from animal instinct, but he's starving. My angel is starving. Tonight, I'm not going to fight him. We can make a thing of it before his mind is taken by the moonlight. If anybody finds this, finds me, just know that I wanted this. I wanted to save my angel from his hunger. There was only silence left between Sharon and me as she had finished reading. Slowly, she placed the papers down, looking a little bit ill. He let this person kill him? What in the world was he going on about? An angel. Pulling my gaze away, I stumbled upon the file that I recognized from last night. I bit my tongue and then struggled to form a sentence. I want to know everything. Who Joshua knew and who his friends were. Those who went missing and those he moved apart from. In reality, I felt numb. This couldn't be real, could it? Sharon was just as confused and disturbed as I was. Yes, Harrison, but what do you think he was talking about? He doesn't seem to be stable, I mean. The way that he talks here as well. It's odd to say the least. What the heck was going on? I remained silent for a while. I don't know. I'm gonna go ask around town and see if I can learn anything. I paused. Alone. Sharon just nodded, knowing that I was as perplexed as she was about the whole business. And taking my coat, I left, planning on walking over to R's place to chat with him, to see if he could talk some sense into me. The walk across town was long and laborious as I held my head down for most of the way. Moving my way through the waves of people, I drew closer to the building where R worked. The sense of dread that had hung over me ever since last night, which had strengthened after reading the journal, felt so much greater now. The face and form of the young white-haired man was etched into my mind. I quickened my step onwards. Pushing the door of the clinic open, I started to head over to the front desk to call for R. But that was when I saw him. Alone and sitting on the furthest most chair from the door sat a young boy. His clothes were tattered, his hair long and white. He looked like a ghost. His skin was marble. I felt a sharp inhale of air enter my chest. Harrison, what are you doing here? R called, walking around the corner. I snapped from my trance and grabbed his arms, trying to get him to listen. There, look, there, As I turned to point to the boy, I saw that the chair was empty, as though I had simply imagined him. R gave me a puzzled look. A chair? His accent sounded a little stronger than normal as he muttered, "Are you okay?" No words came out of my mouth, but I nodded, letting go of R. "Let's get you some coffee and give you a place to sit down, okay?" Without waiting for a response, R led me into a small conference room and got me to sit, before walking off to get some coffee for the both of us. Taking deep breaths, I tried to control myself. "And don't let the stresses get to you." I tried to breathe slowly. Perhaps this was just a stress-related episode, but the only thing that I could think about was Joshua and his killer, who in my mind was the white-haired teen. Before long, R came back, a folder under his arms along with 2 steaming hot cups of coffee. I knew the man had an addiction to coffee and would offer or accept it at any opportunity. Passing me my mug, I felt myself start to relax even before I started to drink. R sat across from me, placed his work down, and then also started to drink. "What happened out there?" he asked after a short pause. "I don't know, I think the stress is getting to me." I responded flatly, hardly concentrating. R sighed and then smiled. "How old are you, Harrison? You're in your 60s now. Shouldn't you be living at home with your wife retired?" I glared at him for a moment. "Doctor's orders, you need to rest, Harrison. Look, I know you enjoy this and your wife likes to keep you busy, but this job, this style of life really isn't too good for you, considering." My face softened and I nodded a little. "In this case in particular, why don't you leave it to Sharon and the other boys at the station? They're all up to solving it. I just don't think you should be working with a case like this. Not after, well, you know." I've accepted what happened, R, and I don't want to retire. This job keeps my mind working. No, it doesn't, Harrison. I can see it in your eyes. I'm saying this not as a doctor, but as your friend. You should stay with your wife and rest for a few weeks. R's voice had gotten softer. He knew that my wife's time was short now. Finally, I nodded and agreed. For hours, I just chatted with R about life. Looking back, I guess I did need to cut down my work hours and spend more time with my lovely wife. Night was falling as I started to walk home. People were buzzing around, migrating back to their homes from their long work days. I felt better about life, more relaxed. Passing by shop fronts and restaurants, I started to instinctively look at people, blocking out the bad images with the nicer ones. A couple were courting in the park under the old oak tree. One of the town's resident homeless was sitting at a bus stop with his large headphones on, tapping his foot in time with an unknown song. A proud giant of a man was walking home with his young son, carrying a bag of football kit. I found myself smiling, feeling the tensions of the case melt away. A girl selling roses, a man going to work at a restaurant, a white-haired teen in a light purple jumper looking over at me with dead blue eyes. I stopped abruptly and looked back. The teen had gone again, vanished into the crowds. My mouth felt dry. It was only stress, right? I quickened my steps, feeling my body pump with adrenaline. A cab sitting at red lights, a scruffy man walking down back streets, the white-haired boy again, his neck purple like it was bruised. I walked faster still. The sky was orange as the sun set. The building to my right had 5 floors. The dumpster around the corner house 3 bin bags. The white-haired boy again. His face wet from tears and pure white hair stained crimson. My eyes darted forward, away from the crowds, and fell on him again. One eye was golden and it seemed to be ruptured while the other was soft blue. His body looked so cold. I staggered back, but he had vanished again in the blink of an eye. Panicked, I started to run to the warmth of my home, my whole body shaking now. Breathless, I flew down my small street and fumbled for my keys before pushing the door open. Inside, I tried to catch my breath, taking lungful after lungful of air. Exhaling heavily, and I looked around. The money pot that stood on a small table by the doorway to the living room was smashed on the floor, and so too was one of the lamps, a picture frame, keys. I felt as if time had stopped as I became aware of the sound of erratic breathing and gasping. I ran around the corner into my living room where I saw my wife convulsing on the floor. Her eyes were unfocused, one half of her face slumped to the side, her mouth half open. She was having another stroke. Lunging forward, I went to take her into my arms, but that was when I saw it. "So hungry," he murmured. One soft blue eye locked on my wife. He was thin, pale, and cold. Moonlight poked its head out from behind the clouds for a moment, showing his true nature. Vast wings of pure light in a halo. Bloody white claws on both his hands and feet. Bloody neck, head and mouth, adorned with hundreds of sharp teeth. As soon as the clouds covered the moon again, he reverted back to the corpse that he was. My eyes were locked on it. The angel of death that sat and watched as my wife had died. It was as if something had taken over the body of a young man, and now wore his skin like a well-fitting glove. "What are you?" I screamed. Its eyes remained fixed on my wife, stiller now. "Hungry, starving." I turned to my wife, taking her in my arms. This seemed to confuse the angel, puppeteering the body that it called home. It moved towards me and my wife. The moon shone on it again, and the smell of rot was stagnant in the room. "Get back." It didn't listen, simply moved closer, licking its long claws. "I want it." For a split second it vanished out of sight, and my world went dark. I woke to a pounding pain in the back of my head. I forced myself upright before promptly clasping a hand over my mouth at what I saw. The starving angel was crouched over my wife's body, or what was left of it, pulling away at the chest mindlessly, pushing flesh and muscle into its mouth. I thought that I would vomit, but grabbing for my handgun, I took aim. Its dead eyes looked at me through bloody white hair, not seeming to know or care what I was doing. "Get off of her!" I screamed before shooting all 5 rounds into its head. To my horror, the angel took every single one, reactionless. Every bullet fell back out the hole that it had made, bringing a pungent smell of rot with it before closing up. Though it was futile, I continued to click the trigger of my gun, though nothing came out. I shouted and screamed, but it just continued to eat. The neighbors arrived a short time later, reporting that they found me with the body of my wife, crying and screaming at monsters. Sharon and the rest of the police force had arrived shortly after, and took me to the hospital and my wife to the morgue. No trace of the angel was found, but I know what I saw. I saw him at the funeral, at the side of my wife's grave, by the roadside, watching the world and all its death. Since that night, I've retired from the force and I live alone. The stress is causing me heart problems, and R keeps warning me that I could have a heart attack if I continue to live the way that I do. But I know that I don't have much time left anyway. Since the angel is back, and he keeps telling me that he's hungry. I lie awake at night, the glow of his wings illuminating my room. If there is a God, he is nothing more than the monsters that he's created. I can feel my chest getting tighter as my heart fails me. I watch as the starving angel lifts his head and watches me with hunger in its eyes. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. In today's world, we have so many subscriptions that it's hard to keep up with them all. Whether it be for TV, streaming, music, or food, the list goes on and on. Thankfully, with Rocket Money, they make managing all of my subscriptions a breeze. Recently, for me, the prices of a few of my subscriptions had randomly increased, and without Rocket Money, I wouldn't have been alerted and then been able to cancel them. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things that you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. That's rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. The following was a blog post by John Goodman, posted on the 17th of August 2011. Included with it was a download link to $1.wave. The file in question has been converted to OGG format so that it may be uploaded. Goodman mentioned in the post that he would be doing extensive research on the mysteries surrounding this file. If he reports anything back, it'll be posted here. After my computer got burnt to a crisp in a lightning storm, I was left with only my old computer. Fortunately, I had everything from my destroyed computer already backed up onto USB drives and CD-ROMs. My old computer was running Windows 98 and desperately needed an OS upgrade. It was time to search online for a new OS install disk that was at an affordable price. Now you might ask, why not just get a new computer? I would have, but because of the crappy economy, I didn't have the money to do so. So my only other option was to upgrade my old one. Anyways, I searched around eBay to see if anybody was selling a copy of Windows XP at an affordable price. There was no way my computer would be able to handle Windows Vista or 7, so I would just have to go with XP. Lo and behold, somebody was selling a full Windows XP clean install disk for only $1.45. Nobody else was bidding on it, so I placed mine. Even after I had placed my bid, nobody else did. So needless to say, I won the disc, with nobody else to challenge me. A few days later, I received the disc in a white envelope. I opened the envelope and pulled out the disc. It seemed just like any other XP bootable disc. I turned on my old computer and I popped it in and installed Windows XP as one normally would. While I waited for it to install, I popped some popcorn, took a dump, and watched some TV. Occasionally checking on the progress of the installation and responding to dialog boxes, entering the registration code, etc. Finally, it had finished installing and I could use the computer. The first thing that I did was transfer everything that I had backed up from my destroyed computer to the old computer. CD after CD, USB drive after USB drive, and I finally got everything onto my computer the way that I wanted it. I decided to randomly browse around the computer a little before I turned it off and got ready to go to bed. This random browsing led me to the Windows Media folder, and then I noticed a file in there called $1.wave. I didn't put the file on the computer, so I assumed it was installed along with the other files in the folder. But I realized that I didn't remember any such file ever being included with XP when I had it on my destroyed computer before I had upgraded it to Windows 7. Curious, I double-clicked the file to open it. It was a very peculiar file. All I heard when I opened it was some weird static noise, almost as if it was some extremely distorted song. The file was just 4 solid minutes of this weird sound. It kind of creeped me out. I mean, it was nighttime, with my sleeping dog being my only company. And I find a file on my computer that I never put there, and wasn't part of the original XP installation, and all it is 4 minutes of weird static noise. And furthermore, it's in a systems folder. Thinking that it might be a virus of some sort, I scanned the file, and behold, one Trojan came up. I had no clue where I would have gotten it from. I had barely been on the internet at all since Windows XP was fully installed. Suddenly, I realized that I had seen a file with the same name flash for a split second on the screen as the disk had installed all these system files. I could only come to one conclusion. The disk had been tampered with. I decided to delete the Trojan, delete $1.wave, and do a full system scan with both of my antivirus programs. It was going to take a crapload of time to finish scanning, so I decided to go to bed while I waited. I still felt a bit mad that I had went through all that time to finally get my computer set up and upgraded the way that I wanted it, only to find out that the installed disk had been tampered with. I woke up the next morning, ate my breakfast, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went into my computer room. I sat down at my computer and turned on the monitor, which I had turned off last night before I went to bed. I couldn't believe what I saw. My desktop background had been changed to a picture of a dollar bill. There were 2 errors saying that my 2 antiviruses had crashed, along with a bunch of other blank error dialogues that were all titled $1.wave with the single OK button. Every icon on my desktop had been replaced with a shortcut to $1.wave, even the recycle bin. My start button now said $1.wave, and the usual flag icon was replaced with a $sign. When I clicked the start button, or in this case the $1.wave button to bring up the $1.wave menu, every icon there was also replaced with $1.wave. The administrator name was changed to $1.wave, and the account picture was that of a dollar bill. I clicked Don't Send Report to both the errors, saying that Malwarebytes and Microsoft Security Essentials had crashed. I then clicked the OK button on each $1.wave error box. Okay, the screen was cleared of all those windows now. I tried to reopen my antivirus programs, but they gave me a blank error titled $1.wave. I clicked OK on those. I went to the $1.wave menu and clicked Shut Down, but I just got the familiar clunk error sound. I tried the power button, nothing happened. Finally, I just unplugged the computer and it finally shut off. I plugged it back in and I booted in safe mode and tried opening the antivirus programs there. But when I did, my computer made the weirdest noise ever and abruptly powered off. I tried pressing the power button, but nothing happened. It didn't even wear up. That freaking virus had completely destroyed my only remaining computer, and I hadn't even gotten it from a website or anything. It had come with my operating system. Well, that was that. I had to go get some things at the grocery store, so I left the house along with my dog. I have yet to earn enough money to buy myself a new computer. I do everything computer related on a friend's laptop that he generously lets me borrow when I need to check my email, do something on my bank account, etc. I have also used that same laptop to type up and publish this story to the internet, along with $1.wave, which I've gone through and manually removed the malicious coding from. After a certain cryptic message that I read talking about some last evidence that will have to be destroyed if I share it with anybody, which you will read about in just a moment, I have decided to research as thoroughly as I can about the mysterious $1.wave until I've figured out the sinister mystery that surrounds it. How did I get back $1.wave after my computer was destroyed, you might ask? Well, when I got home, my dog's ears perked up and she began growling menacingly. She followed a scent into the computer room. Everything seemed normal. However, when I looked where my second destroyed computer was, it wasn't there. Everything else was still there, but the computer was gone. I thought of a robbery, but who would want an old computer that doesn't even boot up anymore? I also noticed the tampered with XP install disk that I had gotten off of eBay was missing as well. In its place was a different disk. It was a white CD-ROM with something written on it in a green Sharpie. I picked up the disk and read, "This is the last remaining evidence that I know of. Keep it secret or I'll have to destroy it too." I glanced down at the table that the disk had been sitting on. Where it had been was a single dollar bill. It wasn't crinkled or damaged in any way, unlike most dollar bills. It was in absolutely perfect condition, as if it had just been made. I took the disc and the dollar over to my friend's house. the one that has the laptop that I've been typing these words on. I explained how both of my computers were destroyed, and he agreed to let me borrow it whenever I needed to. So I got on the laptop and put the CD in. On the CD was just one file, $1.wave. On August 26, 2011, John Goodman made another blog post regarding his continuing research of $1.wave. Hey everyone, it's me again. So, you all remember that $1.wave crap that I posted about a week or so ago, right? Well, like I said I would, I did some research on it. Simply searching $1.wave on Google yielded no results. I asked on a message board about the file, but nobody seemed to have even heard about it before. That is, until I got a reply from some guy saying that he knew of the file and he had bad times with it. It went as follows. Oh, don't even remind me. $1.wave, it's amazing how much trouble a 4-minute sound clip of heavily distorted music can cause. Yeah, it was years ago. Some person on Craigslist was selling a computer with Windows XP already installed on it. At the time, Vista was still in beta and 7 didn't even exist yet. I went to our house in Cleveland to pick up the computer. I brought it home and I turned it on. I noticed a WAV file in the Windows Media folder entitled $1.wave. Curious, I opened it up and listened to it. It was nothing special. Perhaps a little creepy, but it didn't interest me. So I closed it and I went to the bathroom. I came back to my computer and I couldn't believe what I saw. Everything was changed to dollars or some crap and a bunch of error messages titled $1.wave. I tried using my antivirus to fix what I instantly took as a virus, but it wouldn't open. I tried turning off the computer, but it wouldn't turn off, no matter what. The only thing that worked was unplugging it. I tried to boot in safe mode and use my antivirus there, but upon trying to open it, my computer made this bizarre noise and shut off, and it refused to turn back on. I don't mean refused to boot into the OS, I mean literally just wouldn't power back on as if it wasn't plugged in. The next day my computer was gone with just a single dollar bill in its place. Yeah, I know it sounds insane and you probably won't believe me unless you had a similar experience with the file yourself. Cleveland. eBay had told me that the item location was Cleveland. I now had a new mission, track down the person that sold me the install disk. I replied to him saying that I had indeed had a very similar experience and requested that he give me the exact address of the woman that sold him the computer, as I wanted to have a little talk with her. I probably sounded like a stalker, but I didn't really give a crap. I needed to figure this out. Surprisingly, the user actually sent me the address of the woman to me in a private message. Living in Ohio myself, Cleveland wasn't too far away, so me and my dog got into the car and drove off. We arrived at a small yellow house that could only be the home of a woman who sold me the install disk. We walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. A woman almost instantly answered the door. She seemed to be an elderly woman, short and stout with white hair tied up in a bun. And then I looked into her eyes. Oh, those eyes, they seeped through me and into my soul, hungrily examining it, seeing if it was suitable to feast upon. I almost sprinted back to my car and drove off right then and there, but I couldn't. I had a mystery to solve. "Why, hello, John Goodman," said the woman, in a menacing voice that sent shivers down my spine. My first thought, oh dear, she knows my name. Oh God, please help me. My dog growled threateningly at the woman. It took all of my courage to finally sputter out. Okay, look, I don't have time for fooling around. What is $1.wave and why did you put it on my Windows XP install disk? Oh, I can't tell you that, cackled the woman whom I was now certain was no good. Why not? I countered angrily. Because, said the evil woman. However, I can tell you this. Be wary in the days that follow, for $1 will haunt until all is hollow. And before I could say another word, the woman shut the door on me, cackling wickedly. I had no other choice but to walk back to the car. Along the way, a man came by and asked me, "What were you doing over there?" "I was talking to the woman that lives in that house over there," I replied. The man's expression became concerned. "Nobody has lived in that house for over 10 years. I looked to the house, but instead of the bright, yellow, cheery house that I had seen when I had arrived there was a crumbling, abandoned foundation with a wooden plank nailed to the front door saying, "Condemned," in green letters. But I was just talking to an elderly woman that lived there a minute ago," I argued. All the color drained from the man's face. "Elderly woman?" "Yes," I said. "You know, with her hair all tied up in a bun and whatnot." The last person who lived there was an elderly woman, always having her hair tied up in a bun. But she's dead. So I didn't actually find out much of anything new about $1.wave, but apparently it was created by a ghost. Interesting, but it's no laughing matter. I realized that the moment I saw that dang woman out of the corner of my eye, giving me that freaking soul-devouring stare and smiling like a maniac. When I focused on her though, she disappeared. I then proceeded to sprint out of the room and hide under a blanket for the rest of the night. When I dared go back into the living room, a dollar bill lay on the floor where the woman had been. On August 29th, Goodman updated the blog again with yet another report about his research on the ominous $1.wave. "Yeah, it's official. That old hag is stalking me. Since my last post, I've been catching glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye, always with that soul-devouring stare and demented smile. She always vanishes as soon as I focus on her, and it always has to be at night when it happens. Each time I get the heck out of there and hide under a blanket for the rest of the night. When I dare enter the room again, there's a dollar bill where the woman was. I've actually collected all the dollar bills that she's left for me, beginning with the one that came with the last evidence disc into one wallet. I've gone 3 days straight without sleep because of this crap. In the most recent incident, she was even holding a bloody knife. Well, that was enough encouragement for me. I packed up a few things and me and my dog piled into the car and went to my friend's house. Unrelated, I haven't told you my dog's name yet, have I? Well, their name is Coco, as in chocolate cocoa. Anyways, as I was saying, I told him everything that had happened. I had kept it secret because I figured if I told him, he would think that I was insane. But at this point, I really had no other option. About $1.wave, the old hag that seems to want to kill me for some reason, etc. I expected him to say that I was crazy and call a mental institution, but miraculously he believed me. I guess he knew that I wouldn't make crap like this up. So I'm going to be staying at his place until this situation blows by. Posted August 30th, 2011. Tonight my friend glanced out the window and all the color had drained from his face, and Coco growled menacingly at it. I looked out the window and I saw it. That blasted old hag. She stared into the room from outside with that soul-devouring stare and that same demented smile. And then she disappeared. We didn't need any more encouragement. We pulled down those blinds and nailed boards to every window in the house, as well as the front and back doors. I don't think we'll be going outside for a while. Posted August 31st, 2011. I went on my friend's laptop and checked the forum thread that I had posted asking about $1.wave. Someone had replied there under the username $1, and take a guess what their profile picture was. That cursed old hag's face, with her trademark staring grin. Her reply simply said, "Oh, more evidence. Guess I'll have to destroy it." I clicked the reply button to respond, but it said that the thread never existed. Furthermore, when I searched the username $1, it said that no user ever existed. Weirdest of all, her join date had been back in 1928. Yeah, 9 freaking decades ago. The internet didn't even exist back then. Posted September 1st, 2011. While on my friend's laptop, a dialog box had suddenly appeared, prompting me to download $1.exe. Knowing this could only be more of the old hag's haunting, I canceled the download. But guess what? It downloaded anyway. Ain't that just nifty? As soon as it finished downloading, it opened itself up. I prepared for the worst. Another computer-destroying virus. The old hag had contained within a computer file. It opened and it was a game. A game of all the wretched things that $1.exe could have been. It was some PC game. It showed a generic menu screen with the buttons play, exit, and options. The background was a picture of a dollar bill. I clicked options, just some graphic settings and such. I went back and clicked play again, preparing myself for the worst. It gave an instruction screen on how to play. Basically, the concept was that you were a bank robber, and in each level, you had to go through obstacles to get to the bank and rob it. In each bank, you would have to fight a boss, and if you beat the boss, you would get the money. So I played the game with my friend and Coco watching me anxiously. Unrelated again, my friend's name is Bill. It was your generic platform game, and I played through it quite easily. I beat 3 levels, and then the 4th one was the final one before I got to the bank. I beat that level and fought the boss. The boss was some kind of banker with superpowers or something. It was a World 1 boss, so he was ridiculously easy to beat. I beat him by shooting him in the head with a pistol, and I got the money. The game counted up my scores and so forth before taking me to the first level of World 2. I figured that I had played enough, so I tried to exit the window. But clicking the X only greeted me with the Windows error sound. It wanted me to keep playing, and judging by all the weird crap that had happened to me recently, the reasons couldn't be good. So I tried ending the application process with the task manager, but the end process button only gave me the error sound again. I tried shutting down, but the shutdown button gave me the same sound. It was very similar to when $1.wave had first destroyed my old computer. Because the laptop was running on a battery, I had to take the battery to shut it off. I put the battery back in, rebooted, and everything was normal again. I deleted $1.exe. It didn't come back like $1.wave did. It stayed deleted. Posted September 4th, 2011. More corner of my eye sightings of the old hag. In all of them, she's holding a bloody knife. Boarding up our windows and doors didn't seem to help. She still got into the house. Today we unboarded the front door to go get the Sunday paper. I mean, even if we're hiding from a sadistic ghost woman who wants to kill us, we still gotta keep up on the news, right? It said that a banker had been found dead at a local bank with a bullet wound in his forehead. It showed a picture of the man, and to our horror, he looked exactly like the World 1 boss from $1.exe. The way in which I had defeated him had even been a pistol to the head, and the paper said that there was a bullet wound on his head. As I read the paper, I saw the old hag again out of the corner of my eye, holding a dead corpse under her arm that looked just like the banker. This time I didn't focus on her. I focused on the paper to see what would happen if I didn't make her disappear. If she tried to kill me or anything, I would just look at her. She just kept standing there with that demented smile on her face. After a few moments, her smile began to fade and turn into a frown, as if she was disappointed that I didn't seem to notice her. I looked to Bill, and surprisingly, he had followed suit. Even Coco was pretending not to notice the hag. I turned back to the paper so that I could continue seeing the hag out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't easy trying not to see something yet see it at the same time. I kept wanting to look, but I knew that if I focused on her, she would disappear. I wanted to know what would happen if that didn't happen. Her disappointed expression then turned to a fierce and angry look. She raised her knife and lunged at me. In unison, me, Bill, and Coco all whirled around to face the ghost. She stopped abruptly just as she was about to reach us and then vanished. This raised yet another question. If she wants to kill us so badly, why didn't she just do it and get it over with, instead of taunting us like this? Maybe she doesn't want to kill us. Maybe she just wants to make us think she wants to kill us, make us paranoid to the point of insanity, just for her own pleasure and amusement. Sure wouldn't surprise me. Posted September 5th, 2011. I woke up this morning from the little sleep that I actually got. I opened my eyes expecting to see the ceiling above me, but then I froze. Standing above me, looking down into my eyes with her soul-devouring stare and insane smile was the hag. For several moments there was silence. I said nothing for I was too afraid. I didn't move, I didn't even breathe. My heart had threatened to burst, it was pounding so hard. And then finally the hag broke the silence. "Good morning, John," she said. It took all of my courage to respond. "Just tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. Just leave me alone," I replied. "Oh, it's just so sad when you have to live under a curse. The curse of my own creation. Forced to pass on the curse to others. The curse of $1, of greed. I never asked for this, but after having it shoved down my throat so much, I've come to enjoy it. I'm not sure if it's my sanity that's been punished by this or what, but it comforts me to know that others are feeling the same pain as me." "Enough of your cryptic crap," I yelled, and then suddenly Coco jumped out of nowhere and tackled the hag to the ground, growling furiously. The hag simply smiled. "Go ahead, do it. Rip me to shreds. It might just be the only hope of destroying this curse once and for all. Your suffering will be gone and everybody who's ever fallen victim to greed's villainy." Before another word could be said, Coco began tearing that woman to shreds. I never knew my dog could be so violent, but I didn't care. If it meant the end of this that loomed over us, then it was worth it. Me and Bill, who had been woken up by all the commotion, could only watch as the hag was torn apart. She didn't even scream. In fact, she smiled as if saying, "Thank God it's finally over." And then it was done. Her body was mangled and ripped so badly that you couldn't recognize her. Red was splattered everywhere. And then the body, or the pieces of it anyway, began to shimmer and fade away. And then they were gone. No trace of them remained, as if nothing had happened. And then we noticed a note laying on the floor where the hag had been. Bill picked it up and read it aloud. "Destroy the dollars, destroy the disc. Do it before the remnants of the curse that lie within them enslave you as it enslaved me." I instantly knew what I had to do. I found the wallet that I used to keep all the dollars that the hag had left me, and I lit a match to it. A blood-curdling scream of pain sounded from it and almost made me jump out of my skin. I threw it outside and it burned until it was nothing but ash and dust. And then I found the disc containing $1 wave. I threw it to the ground and I stomped on it. Another blood-curdling scream, and the disc spontaneously burst into flames. Now that is what I call burning a CD-ROM. It burned until it was nothing but a bunch of melted plastic. I had to use a shovel to scrape it off the ground and chuck it outside. For the rest of the day, nothing else happened. The hag never came back, nothing. I think at long last this nightmare might be over, but I won't make assumptions too quickly. I'll wait a while and see if anything else comes up. If nothing else does, I guess it's safe to assume the haunting of $1 wave is ended. Posted November 12th, 2011. Well, I think I've waited long enough without anything happening that I can safely assume it's all over. Me and Coco have moved back into our own house. Things seem to be returning to normal. And after some thinking, I've come up with a hypothesis as to what all that crap was about. I think the hag was forced by a curse to do those terrible things. The curse was like a virus using her to spread to others, I guess $1 and all the associated things are all duplicates of this virus. I can only assume that its proper name is greed, since that's what the hag kept referring to it as. How greed came to be or what its purpose is, I can only wonder, but the hag seemed to hint that it was she who created it, and it was a screw-up that she made that had caused all of this. I guess those dollars, the disc, and the hag were the last remnants of greed, and by destroying them, I had destroyed greed forever. She was so anxious to get her hands on evidence and destroy it, because she wanted to destroy the curse of greed. I don't know whether any of these guesses are even remotely correct, but I don't really care. As long as this nightmare is over, I'm content with not knowing. And I'm pretty darn certain that it's finally over. My name is Henry Goodman. Yes, I'm related to John Goodman, the blogger that had a rather unpleasant experience with a file called $1.wave. I'm his brother. I am the father of 3 kids, and I have a wife whose name is Jenny Goodman. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm here to tell you about a rather disturbing experience that I had involving a used camcorder that I got off of eBay. It's strange, both me and John's problems happened when we bought something off of eBay. Anywho, on with my story. So, me and my family were planning a vacation and we wanted to capture our trip on tape as well as take some photos. Unfortunately, our video camera was broken, so we would have to either get a new one or just take photos instead. So I went on eBay to see if anybody was selling a camcorder. Well, long story short, I found one, I bid on it, and I won. A few days later, I received a small package which had the camcorder in it. I opened it up and took the camcorder out. It was the typical camcorder with the little small screen on it and such. It had some black Sony camcorder tape, so I opened it up and put one inside. To my surprise, however, there was already a tape inside. I assumed it was one that the previous owner forgot to take out. It was a used camcorder. I hoped nothing important was on it, otherwise they'd be pretty upset about losing it. I took the tape out and I looked at it. There was a piece of yellow masking tape stuck in the front, labeled with a black Sharpie. 2006. Just that and nothing else. I decided to play the tape just to see what was on it. So I put the tape back inside the camcorder and I hooked it up to my TV to watch the tape on it. I rewound the tape, but it was already at the beginning. So I did the usual crap to play a tape from a camcorder on the TV. The tape started with 10 seconds of a blank blue screen, and then it cut to somebody filming a school playground on a cloudy day. Kids ran around and played, but whoever was filming seemed to just be interested in one of them. A little girl, probably around 5 years old, with pale skin, brown hair, brown eyes, and wearing a yellow coat. Whoever was filming seemed to be following her and watching her play. Sometimes the person filming would talk to the girl. It was a man's voice. He called the girl Alice, and I assumed the person filming was the girl's father. I assumed it must have been some recording of her last day of school or something. So, if that was a recording of the cameraman's daughter's last day of school, that must have been important to him. I felt bad for him losing something this precious. But I had little time to ponder that because suddenly, a very loud droning buzzing sound burst from the speakers, scaring the living crap out of me. The scenery had changed. It was now nighttime and the school was deserted, except for the girl. All the while, that ear-piercing buzz continued to sound from the speakers as I plugged my ears. The girl was turned away from the camera so I couldn't see her face. She stood there motionless, and then she turned to face the camera, and what I saw, well, I didn't see that one coming. The girl's eyeballs were gone, just dark empty sockets where they should have been. There wasn't blood or anything, the eyeballs were literally just gone. Her mouth was drooling some kind of disgusting green slime and her nose was missing. Not like it was cut off, just not there. Just plain skin where it should have been. Think of Patrick from SpongeBob. Yeah, you get the idea. The scene then burst into static. The buzzing noise stopped, but you could hear the sound of knives slicing against flesh and blood-curdling screams. And then the scene returned and the girl was hanging by a swing in a swing set. Several nasty wounds around her body and a knife laying on the ground below her. Her eyeballs were missing and her mouth still dripped that weird slime, and she still had no nose. The tape was silent. No loud buzzing or anything, just silence as the girl dangled around. Heart pounding so hard it threatened to burst, scared out of my mind because of the sudden buzzing sound and, to a lesser degree, the disturbing footage that accompanied it. I sprinted over to the TV and I shut it off. I ejected the tape from the camcorder, shut the camcorder off, and then unhooked it from the TV. I took a hammer and I smashed the tape to tiny pieces. Breathing heavily, still not sure what the heck had just happened, I sat back down on the couch. I just stayed there for a while, staring at the blank TV screen. After I had finally calmed down, Jenny came home from the grocery store. I helped her bring the groceries in. I didn't tell her about the tape because she would think that I was going insane. The dream I had that night was not pleasant. I was in a dark hallway. My throat, it felt like somebody was repeatedly flicking my Adam's apple. That loud buzzing from the tape played nonstop. It wasn't coming from any direction. It was just there in my ears, as if I were wearing headphones and the sound was playing in them. I was scared out of my mind. I wanted desperately to get out and to go home, to be in the comfort of my bed. I tried crying for help, but no matter how hard I tried, no sound would come out. Suddenly, I felt the urge to vomit. Not having a bucket or a toilet nearby, I puked on the floor. But instead of puke, I hurled up a small Sony videotape with masking tape on the front labeled 2006 in black Sharpie. And then the tape morphed into a girl. No, not just any girl. It was the girl in the tape. Her eyeballs were gone and her mouth oozed green slime, and she had no nose. She slowly walked down the hallway and for some reason I followed. All the while that awful buzzing noise kept playing. She led me down the hallway and I realized where I was. I was in an elementary school. Kids' drawings and other art lined the walls. Posters saying, "Vote Josh for school president" were everywhere. You get the idea. She led me out an open door and into the playground. It was the very same playground from the tape. And a man was there holding a camcorder recording us. But not just any camcorder, it was the very same camcorder that I had gotten off of eBay. He just stood there recording us. The girl led me over to a swing set. She pulled a knife out of her pocket and my body then became frozen in place. I couldn't move my eyes, I couldn't move my head. I was forced to watch in horror as the girl sliced herself up with it, giving herself these same wounds as in the video. And then the buzzing sound stopped, being replaced with the girl's blood-curdling screams of agony. And then she put her neck into one of the swings as if it was a noose. And then the swing pulled up on its own accord, killing the girl. The girl dangled from it, just like in the video. After a few moments, I could move my body again, and I sprinted over to the man holding the camcorder. He just looked at me and smiled. "That's my girl. I'm so proud." I jolted awake. My heart pounded and my forehead was sweaty and I was breathing heavily. Jenny lay next to me, apparently still asleep. I sat there for a while and finally calmed down. I laid back down in bed and I closed my eyes. I couldn't fall back to sleep. My tossing and turning finally woke Jenny up and she got mad and went to sleep on the sofa. She opened the door but then she froze. She just stood there and I could see that her hands were trembling, and I asked her what was the matter. She just pointed a trembling finger out the door. I got out of bed and I looked to where she was pointing, and my blood ran cold. There was a hallway outside the door going out to the living room where the TV was. From down the hall, I could see the TV. It was on, and on it was the little girl's face, missing eyeballs and all. But then I realized the TV was in the corner of the room and I could not see from where I was. My sleep-deprived brain mistook what I saw as the TV, but it wasn't the TV. It was the window. For crying out loud, what is it with my family and creepy stuff always happening to us? Oh, sorry, let me elaborate. I am Sally Goodman, one of the 3 Goodman siblings. The other 2 are John Goodman and Henry Goodman, my brothers. Lately, freaky things have been happening to us. First, John gets haunted by some insane ghoul hag, and then a freaky mutant girl's face is staring through Henry's living room window. I prayed to God that nothing would happen to the 3rd of the Goodman siblings, but nope. Something just had to happen to me, because I guess the world hates me. Alright, enough of my self-pity. On with my story, I ain't got all day. Well, I had moved into an apartment in Dayton, Ohio. I was unpacking my things and so forth. There was a small storage room by the patio off the apartment, and I opened the door to put some things in there. It seemed to be empty and I walked in. But then I looked down on the floor and I saw that I had almost stepped on a black USB drive. I picked it up and I stuck it in my pocket. I was curious as to why it was left sitting in a storage closet, and also if there was anything on it. I had my laptop with me, so I decided that I would see for myself later on after I had unpacked a few more things. Well, later on in the day after I had done all the unpacking for that day, I got on my laptop and I turned it on. It didn't have an internet connection, but since I still needed to get Comcast to transfer my cable and phone services over to my new home, just in case there were viruses on the drive, I loaded up Windows XP on a virtual machine. I plugged in the USB drive and it did the usual auto-run thing, prompting me with what I wanted to do. I chose to open a folder to view the files. What was in the drive seemed to be files for some kind of game. I ignored those and found the actual game application, which was named knob.exe. I opened up the file and a new window opened up. It was the game. It seemed to be some kind of 16-bit platformer game. You controlled some stick figure thing and guided him through the levels. There was no title screen or anything. It just went right to the first level. The level was some city streets or something, and you had to avoid the traffic to get through the level. The really weird part was every now and then somebody walking along would notice the stick figure, and they would scream bloody murder. The stick figure would then proceed to grab the person and strangle them to death. I got through the first 4 levels, but then I got to the 5th level. Instead of a city street, the stick figure was standing inside a storage room. My heart skipped a beat when I realized where I was. It was a perfect 16-bit replica of the storage room that I had found the USB drive in. Without me even moving him, the character walked over to the door and opened it. He went outside and the scene transitioned to another familiar place, the patio just outside of my apartment. Out of paranoia, I looked out through the glass door leading out to the apartment patio, and to my horror, somebody was there. It was the most disturbing creature that I had ever seen. He was completely naked and hunched over like a gorilla. He was horribly skinny, and so pale it looked like he had never seen the light of day in his life. Black fur grew along his spine. His face, he wore an expression of unspeakable malice and insanity. His mouth was 2 times the size of a normal human's mouth. His teeth were huge, and his evil smile stretched up all the way to his forehead. He had long black hair that dropped down to his shoulders. He had claws longer than his fingers, and they looked sharp enough to cut my head clean off. And then the thing that I dreaded the most happened. He looked up at me with his cold and wicked eyes, and that horrible smile. I glanced back at my laptop screen for a second. The stick figure on the game was looking into the glass window door, just as this terrible creature was doing. I looked back. The creature was beckoning me over to him with his bony and clawed index finger. The character on the game was also beckoning. I didn't want to go with this beast. I couldn't. But I had lost control of my body. I got up and walked straight into the clutches of that monster. I tried to turn away, but my body fought back. I opened the glass window door and stepped out onto the patio. And being close up to this thing was even worse than seeing him from inside my apartment. He held up a map for me to see, and pointed out some directions with his wicked, sharp claw. And then he held up that claw to my throat and he sliced. I woke with a start, sweating and breathing heavily, heart pounding against my ribs like a hammer. It was just a dream. After a while of just sitting there, I calmed back down. It seemed that I had fallen asleep sometime while playing the game. I guess it made sense. I had been having trouble sleeping the past few nights and I was probably tired. I looked at the laptop screen. There was a message saying the game had encountered a problem and needed to close, blah blah blah. I became curious about the directions the creature in my dream had given me. They were real directions to a real place, some pond around the area. I decided just for the heck of it that I would go there tomorrow and check it out. I didn't expect to find anything, since it was only a dream after all, but still. The next day after breakfast, I got in my car and followed the directions to the pond. I got there and I got out of my car. I skipped some rocks and such for a few minutes, not having much of a reason to stay. I started to walk back to the car. But then I noticed something on the ground out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and I went over to examine it. It was a wooden trapdoor of some kind. I remembered the nightmare that I had and I became paranoid, but then I realized how silly I was being. It was all a dream. Nothing bad can really be here, right? There was a handle on the trapdoor that I could lift to open it. Cautiously, I grabbed the handle and I pulled up, to reveal darkness below. I would need a flashlight. I thought that I had one in the back of my car, so I went to go check, and sure enough I found one. I turned it on and I climbed down into the darkness below. The space was empty with nothing but dirt on all sides. But then my flashlight shined on something that made my blood run cold. Something that made me sprint back out the trapdoor, slamming it shut behind me, and back into my car to drive home and smash the USB drive that I had found the day before into tiny pieces and then burn the pieces. The disturbing part is the hissing sound the drive made when I did this, like some terrible snake. It was a figure hunched over like a gorilla, horribly skinny and pale, fur on its spine, drooping black hair, and an insane deformed face. It was the creature from my nightmare and he was looking right into my eyes. The following was taken from a newspaper article. Several sightings of a horribly mutant humanoid figure wandering the streets of Ohio cities have been reported. These supposed witnesses describe it as being a pale figure hunched over like a gorilla, having black fur along its spine, vicious claws, long black hair, and a terribly large mouth, along with an expression of pure malice and insanity. Some witnesses report seeing it strangle people to death, seemingly at random. It would be easy to dismiss these claims as some sick joke if it weren't for these sudden and mysterious deaths of several people. Every person who died has been identified as being strangled to death. Some comments listed below the blog post. John Goodman says, "Hey Sally, thanks for sending this to me. More of this creepy crap. I've never been superstitious, but I'm seriously starting to think that we're cursed or something. This chain of freak shows that's been going down lately just can't be dumb luck." Henry Goodman says, "Yeah, we seem to be attracting the paranormal like magnets. First you, then me, and now Sally. I don't know what's going on, but I hope it ends soon." Anonymous says, "You hope so, huh?" Today's episode is sponsored by Uncommon Goods. Spark something uncommon this holiday season with incredible hand-picked gifts from Uncommon Goods. They make your holiday shopping stress-free by scouring the globe for original, handmade, and absolutely remarkable things for everyone on your list. These gifts spark joy, wonder, and delight, and that, "It's exactly what I wanted" feeling. One of my new favorite items on Uncommon Goods are the Orbit's Eye Stones. Now, I've never heard of these before, but after trying them, they provide eye relief and relaxation. These are perfect for unwinding after looking at your phone or computer as often as we all do. When you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting artists and small independent businesses. Many of their handcrafted products are made in small batches, so shop now before they sell out this holiday season. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/MrCreeps. That's uncommongoods.com/MrCreeps for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. I've been doing this for a lot of years. Sure, I have changed schools a couple of times, had to even move states to help with my wife's elderly parents. But I have always viewed the kids on my bus as an extension of my family. At the beginning of the school year, I prepare a welcome bag for them. Something simple like a box of crayons and pencils for the kindergartners, and maybe a few notebooks for the upper grades. They always enjoy every minute on my bus because I take the time to really truly get to know each one of them. I keep a record of their names and try to associate it with something like favorite food or song and then memorize those details. I know this probably seems like a lot of work when I am only getting paid a measly $13 an hour, but it matters to me. Sometimes these kids are all alone and come from bad homes. It's my job as part of the educational system to provide them with a safe place, even if it's only for an hour coming and going. I think the kids that have the roughest time adjusting to school are the ones that come in late, with zero friends and no clue as to what's happening. I try to help them as much as I can. That was my intention when my boss gave me a new rider on March 30th of this year. It was only a few blocks away from one of my other spots, and according to the paperwork, the kid was 6 years old and named Jack Calford. The file also said that he had 2 siblings, but neither of them were old enough to ride, and that his mother's name was Samantha, and she had recently separated. That told me already that this kid was probably going to have a tough time. I lost my dad at that age, and it's never been easy to connect to anyone. Had it not been for a few strong male figures in my life, I probably wouldn't have had anybody to consider a father. So the next Monday morning, I went the extra mile to get ready to meet Jack. I got 2 sets of crayons, pencils, some staplers and glue, and even a backpack with wheels. I drove up to pick him up at around 7:15, the time that we had arranged with the mom, and I got my first look at his house. A few of the other kids were already making a few remarks because of the dirty, unclean nature of the yard, but I guess that the mom probably didn't have many choices when it came to finding housing. I've always been the kind to give people the benefit of the doubt. I put my air brake on and the flashing lights told them that I was outside. As I opened the door though, I smelled this strange and distant odor. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, but it was very distinct. I think it reminded me of something that I had found under my house once, like old mold. But Jack never came out and I knew that I couldn't wait, so I drove away. The other kids jeered and I had to focus on settling them down the rest of the ride to the elementary school, as I thought about Jack and his current home conditions. I wanted to know for sure that he was okay. Jack didn't show up in the afternoon either, and I asked my boss if I had gotten the wrong address. Well, you know how it is. Parents never remember the first time they try to get their kids out on the bus on time. I couldn't argue with that, so the next day, I decided to wait for a few extra minutes to make sure that Jack could make it on the bus. Again, when I opened the door, I smelled the repugnant odor and I felt my mouth starting to go dry. A few of the kids that I'd already picked were starting to complain, so I honked the horn. Jack's mom waved at the window and I smiled, glad to finally make some progress. A few seconds later, the door to their house opened and I saw Jack step out. Now, I've seen a lot of kids come from bad situations, but the way that this boy was dressed, it just hurt my heart. It was clear that the mom couldn't afford to get him clean pants, or even a shirt that was the right size. And as he got closer to the bus door, I saw that his face was dirty, and that odor that I detected earlier seemed to follow him as he got on the bus. It took me a moment to refrain from being repulsed by the smell. I knew that it wasn't the child's fault, so I smiled at him and offered him the backpack filled with goodies that I had been planning to give him the day before. "Welcome aboard, Jack. You can call me Mr. Charlie," I said with a broad smile. The boy made no response and just took the bag and shuffled his feet towards the back of the school bus. As he passed the other kids by, several of them started to make sarcastic comments about his smell. "Did you sleep in dog crap? Don't you want a bath? Disgusting," one little girl shouted. Jack didn't bother to lash out. He just quietly got to the back of the bus and found an empty seat. Unsurprisingly, nobody wanted to sit by him. Near the end of my route before we got to school, my bus gets typically packed and I nearly got into an argument with a high schooler about Jack. "Mr. Charles, that kid smells like death," the girl said, holding her nose and trying not to gag. "Well, you either sit there or you walk to school," I shouted at her. I hated to raise my voice, but the truth was, during the entire bus ride, the other kids had complained. I knew that Jack was going to have problems as soon as he got into class. After all the kids got off, I gave Jack a half-hearted smile and hoped that his teachers could find a way to get off that awful smell. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't imagine that his mother wanted him to go to school smelling like this. It just bothered me to no end, especially what that one girl had said. Jack smelled like he was covered in the odor of death, and that wasn't an exaggeration. It literally could only be described as the smell that you could get if you had killed an animal and left it out in the hot sun for a week. And that made me so sad to imagine that poor kid having to be bullied and taunted all day because of that smell. Not to my surprise, that afternoon I found out Jack's teacher had made him go home early because too many people had complained about his smell. "I don't think we can let this kid ride in the bus until his mom takes him to a doctor and figure out why he stinks so much," my boss had said. That just rubbed me the wrong way even more. "It's not their fault. Larry, if you saw his house, you would understand. These people are poor. They need some help," I told him. Maybe so, but that isn't our problem. We have about 50 other kids to take care of on that route, and we can't be busy worrying about just one. The school will handle it from here," my boss told me. I told him that I was fine with that, but it just sat wrong with me. I wanted to do something more than just stop and check to see if he could ride on the bus yet. Maybe it wasn't my place to do any of this, but my heart just went out to the kid. I went to Walmart that afternoon and bought him everything that I felt he needed and waited until I got off my work to stop by his house. I've always been told that after hours we aren't supposed to get sociable with our kids or their family, but I kind of felt like this was an exception. I got there around 4:15 and parked my car right in front of their driveway, so there wasn't any surprise about somebody being there. I grabbed the backpack and I walked up to the door, doing my best to ignore the smell that was all across the entire front yard. Knocking on the door, I held the backpack behind my leg and got a better look at the toys that Jack was playing with scattered throughout the yard. There were dolls with their heads bitten off as though the boy had been chewing on them, mismatched Lego sets that didn't seem to have any particular pattern, and action figures that reminded me of those messed up toys from the first Pixar film. Although it told me a troubling story about how Jack's home life was going, was that the reason for his smell? His mother appeared at the front door a moment later, her eyes filled with questions and surprise at seeing me. "Who are you?" she said. "Ma'am, I don't mean to bother, but I work with the school. I'm your son's bus driver," I told her as I briefly glanced inside their home. The mess that was covering the yard easily spread into the first living area. Was it bad that she couldn't clean up after themselves? I didn't want to judge, so instead I showed her the gifts that I had brought for Jack. "I know that you want to give your child a good education, and all of us at the school are worried about him. This is my way of pitching in to help," I said, offering the backpack to her. Her eyes welled up with tears, and I wasn't sure if she was going to have a breakdown or shout in my face. Sometimes it was impossible to be sure how a parent would react. "I can't accept this," she finally said. That was not the response that I was expecting. Before I knew how to even reply, she closed her door hastily and I was standing on the trash-covered front step of her house alone. I sighed, figuring that she must have her reasons, and left the bag with the clothes at the side of her door. I didn't mean to embarrass her, but now my main concern was for the welfare of her child. The next day that Jack rode, it seemed like his mom had overcome her apprehensive attitude because he was wearing the clothes that I had bought. They fit him almost perfect. Walking out to the bus, I saw that he seemed happier than before, and I thought maybe this was the start of a new chapter for him. That changed though when I opened the door to let him on the bus. That same foul smell covered him like a stench despite the new clothes, and this time, I found myself doing my best to avoid throwing up. It was that bad. "Didn't you take a shower?" a girl on the front seat had asked. Jack glared at her, seemingly embarrassed that his new clothes weren't hiding his smell, and then tossed his backpack down and ran back inside his house. Some of the kids giggled, and it took all my self-control not to yell for them to quiet. But I knew one thing for certain. Jack wouldn't be going back to school until that smell was off his body permanently. I don't know why I felt obligated to reach out and help. Maybe because I was already so invested in him. Maybe because he reminded me of myself. But that afternoon, I stopped by their house again with a new goal. It occurred to me that maybe his mother couldn't afford clean water. "I wanted to extend my house to you and your son," I told her. I knew that being older, she wouldn't consider my intentions to be anything except friendly, but she still declined. "I know you've been so kind to Jack, but you need to stop. I don't want anything bad to happen to you," she said. That thought made little sense to me, as I couldn't fathom how helping Jack out would harm me, and the way that she acted bothered me. Was she scared of her son? That couldn't be that. I felt like she was hiding something. She had turned away help from me and from the school time and time again, and I couldn't grasp why that was. So I did something that I've never had to do in my career, and I contacted CPS. I think I was a little angry, maybe because I was just so worried about Jack, but I couldn't think of any other way to help him. I told the representative that I talked to the entire situation, and they thanked me for my diligence. "You've done an amazing job, Mr. Charles. We'll take it from here," a woman told me. That whole weekend, my stomach churned and I worried about what would happen to Jack. They said that they would get to his house as quickly as possible, but I wasn't so sure that it was going to be that easy. Monday rolled around again and I tried to resume normal life and put the worry out of my head. But it got stronger as I arrived at Jack's house. Something was wrong. This time, as he boarded the bus, he looked angry and hostile, as though I had stabbed him in the heart. And the smell was also stronger than it had ever been. I literally had to hold my breath when he was near me, and I saw his mother standing in the doorstep glaring at me. It looked like her arm was covered in scratches. Had Jack attacked her because he was apprehensive about returning to school? It bothered me to no end. What if CPS had come but hadn't found anything disturbing at all? It all felt like something had happened in that house and it wasn't good. I've made it a habit of mine to trust my gut, and this told me that I needed to get inside that house and find out what was happening. I was sure that I would likely lose my job over this, but I needed to know the truth about why Jack's smell hadn't gone away. Why CPS hadn't taken this kid away to a better home. I needed answers. "Jack, is there something happening in your house that you're scared of?" I asked the boy. I made sure he was the last one off that day. I knew the mother would open the door when she saw the school bus and it was going to be my only chance. He only nodded, not even bothering to explain. Not that he needed to. That told me that his mom was not the doting, concerned parent that I had given the benefit of the doubt to. And so I helped him off the bus and walked him up to the door. The mom saw the look on my face and said, "You shouldn't be here. I need to see Jack's room. He took something from me and I want it back." And this was the lie that I had prepared by slipping my Rolex into his pack from the previous day. The mom hesitated at first and then looked down at her son, as though checking with him that it was all right. Jack gave a slight nod and then led me inside. The smell of death was even stronger here. I swear that I saw a dead cat in the corner of the room, and it seemed like feces covered the floor. Jack guided me by the hand to a set of stairs that led to the basement. "What's down there?" I whispered. My blood was boiling. I was so angry with the mom for letting them live this way, but Jack didn't seem bothered. He just tugged my hand and encouraged me to come down with him and said, "My room." The basement was damp and moldy, a single dim bulb burning and hanging from a clothes string. As we got to the bottom of the stairs, I saw something on the floor that looked like it was made out of wood and had a cover on top of it. Getting closer, I realized that it was a tiny coffin, just large enough for Jack. "Is this where you sleep?" I asked. He nodded and I heard a muffled scream. There against the wall was a man about half my age, probably old enough to be Jack's father. He was chained up and had half of his stomach pulled out, blood dripping on the concrete floor. His noises distracted Jack and he went over to his father and I watched in shock as he began to feed on the mangled organs dangling from his side. I stumbled back towards the steps, my eyes not daring to look away as Jack kept eating and snarling. This was no way for a child to live. But then the glint in his eyes and the way that his teeth gnashed against his dad's flesh told me the truth. This was not a child at all. It was a ghoul. I ran up the stairs. The mother was there, trembling and crying as she watched helplessly. "Why don't you call the police?" I asked frantically. She covered her mouth as she watched her son keep feeding. "Have you ever had children, Mr. Charles?" I ran from the house and toward the bus. I got back to work as quickly as possible, and when I shut the bus down, I held my breath for a few moments and I counted to 10. And then I realized that I had left Jack's backpack on the bus again. The stench of death was still coming from it, I dared to unzip it and looked down to see decaying flesh stuffed in his pack like lunch meat. I pushed it away and gagged. I needed to tell someone. As I got off of the bus, I found myself staring at Jack. Somehow he had followed me from his house a few blocks away. "You can't tell anyone," he warned, and then he gestured toward the pack and encouraged me to unzip it again. I looked in the goop of blood and bones and saw something shiny in there. I reached in and pulled it out. It was the badge of one of the CPS employees. I looked up at Jack and he smiled and walked away. Ever since that day, I have had Jack sit on the front row of the bus and given him the best treatment. I've recommended his teachers do the same. Today's episode is sponsored by Kalshi. Kalshi is an app that I've been using that is the first legal exchange that allows you to trade or bet on any event going on. These events can range from economics, politics, culture, technology, finance, and many more. Now, I enjoy playing video games and I'm super excited for the release of Call of Duty 6 this October. With Kalshi, I can make a trade of what the Metacritic score will be for the game. So if I say that Black Ops will have a Metacritic score of 80% or greater, I can place my bet for 40 cents and if I am correct, I'll win $1 per contract with a 60-cent profit. So if I have 100 contracts, that's a $60 profit. Kalshi is the only place to trade or bet on these events in all 50 states. And if you don't want a better trade, you can also look at the live odds for different events and see what's favored to win. I'm proud to have Kalshi as a sponsor and I hope that you check them out. You can sign up using my link, kalshi.com/MrCreeps, and the first 500 traders who deposit $50 will get a free $20 credit. Kalshi, you can trade on that. I wouldn't even have found out about this if it hadn't been for my strange fears and paranoia. For as long as I can remember, I have been deathly afraid of sleeping alone. One of the starkest memories of my childhood is lying flat on my back in bed, feeling too scared to close my eyes, thinking that if I do, someone will appear next to me. The weirdest thing is that I never imagined this monster or whatever harming me in any way. It would always just lay on its side, watching me, with shining, unblinking eyes, and I would be too afraid to do anything, to move or to scream. This helplessness that I would supposedly feel in an imaginary situation like that pretty much destroyed my childhood. It had gotten so bad that I would scream and thrash around like a brat well into my teenage years if I was ever forced to sleep alone. Until I was 10 years old, I would sleep in my parents' bedroom on a separate cot next to their bed. And then, up to my 14th birthday, I would force one of my parents to sleep next to me. And considering that I was raised in India, therapy wasn't even an option. But that didn't mean that my parents didn't try to help get me over these fears. They tried sleeping next to me and sneaking out in the middle of the night, or sitting next to my bed and waiting until I fell asleep. But none of it worked. I would always wake up, sweating and scared out of my wits in the middle of the night, whenever they tried to do this. I would then immediately scamper off to their bedroom and wake them up by whispering how scared I was, almost giving them a heart attack in the process. If I had to guess, these fears started when I was 8 years old, when my grandma gave me a doll of a clown that always made me so uncomfortable. This was a clown from the TV horror show, Whoa, and then my smartass dad made me watch around the same time, thinking that I was too young to be affected by this stuff. He found out how wrong he was when I started screaming like a banshee when my grandma gave me that doll. My problems at night started soon after. I couldn't for the life of me close my eyes without thinking somebody was going to be there when I turned around. On my 14th birthday, my parents finally put down their foot and forced me to sleep alone. I cried and I pleaded, tried to justify that I wasn't really a scared little boy and that my fears were rational, but none of it worked. And so I finally started sleeping alone. And this is when I developed my strange rituals. I would drink exactly 2 glasses of water every night 2 hours before bedtime, so that I neither feel thirsty nor do I have to get up to pee at night. I would then make sure all the doors leading outside were closed, draw the curtains, and keep the bathroom light switches on. Definitely the most important part of my nighttime rituals was keeping the pillows in a straight line, next to where I slept, to block off space for any monster trying to sleep next to me. It took me months before I finally got used to sleeping alone. I wasn't comfortable by any means, but I would at least not be painfully sleepy the next day. Going to college was a godsend. I had a single bed in a tiny room, surrounded by hundreds of noisy boys like me. While many others found it irritating, that noise was like a lullaby to me, doing the job of a therapist. After graduation, I came back to my parents' house and began preparing to take exams for government jobs. And my ritual started right back up, as if nothing had changed. But I was at least sleeping a little bit better. It all came to a head when I got a job and I moved into my own government-owned house with a double bed at the age of 26, just a couple of weeks ago. As my bedtime approached, I followed all of my rituals. I drank my water, closed all of the doors, drew the curtains, arranged the pillows, and slept comfortably. Things changed the next morning. When I woke up, I found that my pillows weren't there. They were neatly placed, one on top of the other, on the side table. The most terrifying thing about this was that it wasn't anything new. This had been happening all throughout my childhood. Each morning, the pillows I had carefully placed next to me would be gone. I had always assumed that it was one of my parents who had done this, especially my father, who was an early riser. But I was living alone now, and all my doors were locked when I checked them in the morning. I initially dismissed this, thinking that I might have forgotten to place them next to me last night. I was actually quite happy with this, as it looked like I was finally getting over my fears. But this happened again the next day, and the next and the day after that. All of the fears of my childhood were back, stronger than ever. I was back to staying awake like an owl, only dozing off for a maximum of half an hour or so each night. And the pillows would be gone from the bed every morning. It was hell. Now, I wasn't a kid anymore, so I didn't just assume that something supernatural was happening here. I tried to act like an adult, to think rationally, even as I was too scared to even tilt my head to the left when lying down in bed. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe that's how those pillows were moved at night all throughout my life. It was not something my parents knew about, however, and they instead chastised me for being so cowardly as a grown-ass man. But I needed answers, and so I went out and I got a video camera and I placed it next to my bed. It was what I found in the video that made me write this. I wasn't sleepwalking. It was my fears, my imaginations, my nightmares. They were real. My knees were trembling as I saw the strange man phase through my bedroom door. He picked up the pillows, neatly placed them on the side table, and laid down next to me. I jumped as he looked directly into the camera, with shining, unblinking eyes. I fast-forwarded the video, and he stayed there for hours, just looking at the camera, not moving even an inch. Before I woke up, he simply got up and walked away, disappearing through the closed bedroom door. I am beyond terrified. I don't know what's happening, what that thing is, and why it's doing this, or even if my life is in danger. I need help. I need this to end if I'm ever going to get a wink of sleep again. Please, guys, help me. The first thing I did after posting this was checking into the busiest hotel in Ranchi, thinking that if I could recreate the environment of my college, I would be rid of that thing, at least temporarily, and finally get a good night's sleep. And so I moved into the busiest, rowdiest hotel that I could find, bang in the middle of the city, after specifically asking for a room with a single bed. As I settled in, I went through my phone. After reading your comments, I went out and I bought a bag of salt, using it to draw a boundary around my bed. A couple of weeks ago, I would have laughed at anybody trying to do something like this, but I was now desperately beyond the point of caring and would do just about anything to make this end. The me from 2 weeks ago didn't know he was being haunted by something that could walk through walls. A lot of you seem to think that this entity haunting me was benign and may even have been protecting me. I have no way of knowing that, and it's not something that I could just assume, considering that the opposite of that was just as likely to be true and that my life was really in danger. All I really wanted to do was to sleep without a monster in my bed. Some of you even suggested that I should try and get with the thing, and I'll admit it, I laughed at that one, and boy did I need that. For those of you wondering why I didn't just get somebody to sleep next to me or get a dog, it really isn't that easy. I had just moved to a new town for my job and I hardly knew anybody there. Inviting them into my bedroom would mean sexual harassment charges, and what would be the point of getting a dog? The barking would wake me up when I wanted to sleep, and besides, I really wasn't in the right headspace to be raising an animal. Next, I tried to send the video I took to my parents and friends, and even thought about uploading it to YouTube. And here's where it gets freaky. Every single time, the video just turned to pure static. I mean, I could watch it on my camera, but every attempt at transferring it to another device resulted in a complete failure. I tried playing the video on my camera and recording the camera on my phone, but even that didn't work. The camera screen seemed to be showing static on the video that I was trying to shoot on my phone, even as the video continued to play on the damn camera. I felt like I was losing my mind. Dejected, I had almost decided that maybe I was going through a mental breakdown when I heard a knock on my door. Room service. The look of shock on that man's face when he saw the video sent relief flooding through my body. I wasn't crazy. This was real. I sent him away with a hefty tip and some lame excuse about an experimental horror movie that I was trying to film in my bedroom, and I settled in for the night. A faint smell of cigarettes lingered in the stale and musky air of the hotel room as I lay in my back, gazing up at the rusting ceiling fan. I was exhausted. Every cell in my body was crying out, wanting me to fall asleep, but it just didn't happen. I was teetering on the edge of consciousness the entire night, frightened out of my mind. I counted sheep, concentrated on the sounds outside, meditated while lying down, but nothing worked. I kept imagining the man waltzing through the walls and sitting down on the couch at the foot of my bed and staring at me throughout the night. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I was imagining it. I didn't think I slept for even a second the whole night, but when sunlight came streaming in through the windows and I got out of my bed, my whole world had turned upside down. The saw line that I had carefully drawn around my bed had been broken in one place. Shit. It was taunting me. It was letting me know that it could get to me anywhere. And not just that, but that it had been doing this for the last 18 years non-stop. I had never been alone, not even back in college. Why didn't I ever find out that he was there back then? Granted, I was a bit of a slob back then, but surely it couldn't have been so bad. The stress and lack of sleep was getting to me at this point, and my head began to pound like it never had before. I trudged downstairs to the hotel canteen and chugged 2 cups of just the trashiest coffee and contemplated my next move. What can I do to make this stop? As I ordered breakfast, my thoughts kept circulating back to that infernal doll my grandmother had given me. Whatever was happening to me, it had started back when my dad made me watch that show, Whoa. And my grandma gave me a doll that looked exactly like that psychotic clown who murdered people by shoving garlands down their throats. Now that I had spoken to my parents and based off of their reactions, I didn't think they had an inkling of what I was going through. They told me that they had thrown the doll away when I had that hysterical tantrum and have no idea what the hell happened to it. And so they left my nanny. Maybe she had inadvertently given me a cursed object. Maybe she even knows what was happening here. I took out my phone and I dialed her number. She picked up the 3rd time that I had called her.
Hello?
Her weak and raspy voice came from the other side.
Who is this?
Nanny, it's me, Aditya, I replied. She was overjoyed at hearing my voice and launched into a long, one-sided conversation, asking me how I was doing, and then complaining about how I never visit even before I could answer, and then meandering on to some random gossip about her neighbors. Nanny, I cut her off. This isn't a social call. I really need your help.
Help? What do you need?
She asked. Do you remember that doll you gave me when I was 8? Where did you get it? I questioned and I waited a full 30 seconds before she responded.
Why are you asking about that?
She asked softly. Strange things have been happening to me recently, Nanny, and I think that doll has something to do with it. I just need to... Hello? Hello? She had cut the call. At some level, I was angry that she hung up on me, but more than anything, I was relieved. Relieved that I wasn't shooting in the dark anymore. My suspicions were correct. She knew what was happening. There might really be a way for me to end this. I called her a couple of more times, but she refused to pick up her phone. I knew what I had to do next. I paid my bills at the hotel, called my boss asking for sick leave, made my way to the airport, and I bought a ticket to Indore. The plane ride worsened my headache, making it impossible for me to sleep. Not that I was even trying to at this point. My grandma sounded scared when I spoke to her, finally convincing me that whatever entity I was dealing with wasn't exactly a friend. I was so exhausted at this point that it was becoming hard for me to differentiate between reality and dreams. I swear to God I saw him phase into and out of the toilet on the plane, but my sleep-deprived brain could very well have been hallucinating the whole thing. He appeared in the reflection on the window, and he might have been sitting next to me or not. Who the hell knows? I was just beginning to nod off when the plane touched down. The next thing I remember is getting out of a cab in front of my nanny's house in Ujjain. The entire journey from Indore to Ujjain is just gone from my memory, apart from brief flashes where I was experiencing microsleep, and my body would come out of mere seconds of sleep with violent, heart-stopping jerks. Nani's home is a pretty little bungalow nestled into an affluent corner of Ujjain. She had lived here with Nana after his retirement and had refused to shift even after he died 6 years ago, despite my mother pleading and warning her of potential murderers. Old people are stubborn, aren't they? I walked up the gravel path, rang the doorbell, and I waited patiently. It took her a while to get to the door, old and frail as she was. "Who is it?" she asked. I imagined she was peering through the peephole, looking at me. Not that it would be much of a help to her at her age. "Newspaper bill, madam," I replied. She slowly opened the door, and her eyes widened as she realized who it was. She had no right to be surprised. If she knew the truth of what was happening, she must have known that I would come. "Hi, Nanny." I gave her a quick hug and entered the house before she could react. 15 minutes later, I was sitting on my favorite couch, sipping Nanny's tea while she sat in front of me, nervously twiddling her thumbs. I had spent so many wonderful summer holidays in this place, but I wasn't here for nostalgia's sake. I had a clear objective and I needed to get to the point ASAP. "Please, Nanny, tell me everything," I said gently. She fidgeted, and it looked like she was going to lie, before taking a deep breath and speaking what I was now sure was the truth. 20 years ago, she began, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was pretty bad. Chemotherapy wasn't working, and your Nana was going further and further into debt because of the medical costs." I nodded. I had heard about her illness and eventual recovery. I had no hopes of survival. It was hopeless, and I had accepted that fact. Until, I prodded. "I met this man," she replied. "He was in the hospital, in the bed next to me, but I don't think that he was a real patient, you know. He had these strange, sparkling eyes, almost like an angel. It was like God had answered my prayers." I clenched my fist at this. "He spoke to me," she continued. "He was very attentive and caring. He listened to me vent for God knows how long, and then..." "And then what?" I asked. "He said he could cure my sickness, make the pain go away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How?" I asked. "He offered me a deal," she answered. "What deal?" I asked, shifting forward. She didn't say anything, turning her face away in guilt. "What deal?" I asked again, forcefully this time. He said. She was in tears now. I was losing my patience. "What did he say?" I shouted. She shrank back in fear and I immediately felt guilty. But before I could apologize, she began speaking again. "A day for a night for a day," she said softly. "What the hell?" "I don't have time for riddles, Nanny. Please tell me what that means." She was looking terrified now, her eyes darting around like a cornered rat. But I wasn't going to let her retreat from the situation. "It means that he would take a day from my grandson's life and give it to me each night, or something." I sat there stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole 18 years of my life," I asked, aghast. "I didn't think you would ever find out," she pleaded pathetically. I put my hand up and she immediately shut up. I then brought this hand further up and I began furiously running it through my hair. Shit, I needed to get out of this place. I was feeling cornered, betrayed, frightened. I don't know. All of those nights that I lay scared out of my wits' end, my soul was being sucked out, one day at a time. I walked to the front door, put my hand on the knob, and before turning to look at my grandmother one last time, who was weeping, "You know what?" I said. "Don't ever talk to me again. You're dead to me." And with that, I slammed the door shut behind me. I would regret that later. I walked over to the park outside of her house and I began to wander aimlessly. She had brought that monster into my life. My own grandmother betrayed me. Every time that I visited her house, played in her lap, all the food she had cooked for me, all this time she knew she was condemning me to this fate. Not only did it take 18 years from my future, she also destroyed the 18 years that I lived through. All that childhood trauma. God, I was so mad that I could rip my hair out. But I needed to focus on the situation at hand. This entity was sucking on my soul, one day each night. I had already lost around 18 years of my lifespan to her selfishness. Who knows what that thing is going to do now that I know about its existence? I had to get him to stop feeding off of me. But how? Damn. I would have to go back and ask her if there is a way to end this curse. My dramatic announcement will have to be put on hold for some time. But what if that can't be done? What do I do then? The fact that I was dealing with this supernatural problem convinced me that going about this the conventional way just wouldn't work. I had been thinking about something and finally decided to go through with it. I called one of my batchmates and I arranged with somebody for a meeting from the Mahakaleshar Temple Management Committee. Perks of being a government officer, I guess. I needed help, but maybe I'll find it in religion. If the Shiva Temple of Ujjain can't help me, maybe nothing can. I closed my eyes, letting all of my emotions wash over me. It had been a long couple of days. The exhaustion began to set in, and I was about to sleep on this park bench when I remembered why I absolutely must not do that, and I violently shook myself. No, I wasn't letting that bastard take even a second from my lifespan. The next time that I sleep, it would only be after I was able to rid myself of this monster. Preparing myself to have another conversation with my grandmother, I plodded over back to her house. Alarm bells began ringing as I saw that her front door had been left ajar. Cautiously, I tiptoed my way inside, looking for any signs of trouble. I found my grandmother in the exact same spot that I had left her, sitting in a pool of blood. Her jaw had been ripped from her skull and was hanging loosely over her chest. I could see her tongue hanging out, longer than I thought was possible. I would have screamed if I wasn't too terrified to do so. My knees felt weak and I collapsed on the floor as I kept on staring at her dead body. I became a coughing, sobbing mess as I had a panic attack right next to my dead grandmother. It was not pretty. Terrified at the sight in front of me, but too scared to move away, I stayed on my knees, panting and wheezing. Soon I found myself crawling over to her body. To do what? I don't know. I felt an overwhelming surge of guilt. Why? I don't know. I just wished that I could take it back. Wished that this nightmare would end. Even after everything that had happened, I still wasn't prepared for what would happen next. Her hand shot up and grabbed me by the throat, pulling me in close to her. My eyes widened in fear, and I began to thrash around violently, trying to get myself free. But she held on with a monstrous strength. The pupils in her eyes jumped around at an unnatural speed as she continued to pull me in closer. I started to fight harder to get free, but to no avail. I felt her breath on my ear, and then I saw her unhinged jaw begin to move as I heard this malicious whisper right next to my ear. "A day for a night for a day. I woke up to the cold, hard floor digging into my back. Slowly blinking my eyes open, I looked around to my surroundings. My nanny's house. The darkness and the annoying sound of crickets made me realize that I had been out for a while. But for how long had I been asleep? As I gingerly started to get up using my elbows and taking the supports of my favorite couch, all the memories of the past few hours came flooding back and I fell back down. Good God, did all of that really happen? I spun my head around to look at the spot where I had found the dead body of my grandmother. There was nothing there. No nanny, no blood. Nothing except for a forlorn, dusty chair. Was any of that real? Or had I dreamt it all up? And if it was just a dream, and the monster was just messing with my head, then where was my grandmother right now? I dragged myself up to the couch, sighing in relief as my back rested against something comfortable after hours. My left knee was killing me, and I don't even know how I injured the damn thing. After resting for about a minute, I got up and I began looking for Nanny. I checked each and every room of the house twice, but there was no sign of her. Things just kept getting more and more confusing. I was feeling so lost and helpless. My last conversation with Nanny kept on playing inside my mind over and over. The extent of her betrayal was unbelievable, yes, but try as I might, I couldn't shake off this feeling of guilt over treating her so badly in what turned out to be her last moments. I guess I'm just messed up in the head. As I shifted on the couch to move into a more comfortable position, my phone rubbed against my thigh, and I suddenly remembered that I had made plans to visit the temple to get help with the situation. Vishal, my batchmate, had texted to inform me that I had a meeting with somebody from the temple management committee at 8:30 in the morning, which was 5 hours from now. I had slept uninterrupted for over 7 hours. It wouldn't be appropriate to visit a temple covered in grime and smelling like shit, and so I decided to take a bath. As weird as it was to be doing so in this house after everything, I made my way over to the bathroom, which was attached to the guest bedroom, and I switched on the water heater. These moments of quiet inactivity in between all the insanity that my life had were the hardest to deal with. This was when I would begin to question my sanity, try and process my emotions. Just nerve-wracking stuff. I would much rather deal with the soul-sucking demon. I wondered what I would tell my mom about what happened to her mother. Should I say that I was never here or concoct some other bullshit? And why the hell was my knee hurting so much? After roughly 10 minutes or so, I stripped out of my boxers and I walked into the bathroom. Turning on the tap for the hot water, I turned around to get a good look at my reflection, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Wrinkles marred my once youthful-looking face. My skin had turned dry, and my hair wore a disgusting shade of salt and pepper, with much more salt there than pepper. It was as if, no, I had aged by 20 to 25 years. I looked like a middle-aged man in his mid-50s. Shit. I furiously rubbed the mirror, as if that would wash away the years that I had aged. I screamed in frustration and anger. That thing had stolen even more of my years than the last few hours. It was now actually letting me feel the after effects of its greed, as if to taunt me that it could take anything it wanted and I could do nothing about it. My stomach was a swirling pit of murderous loathing. I could rip that bastard apart with my bare hands, and I will, and soon. About 4.5 hours later, after a bath and a good meal, I was standing outside of the majestic Mahakaleshwar temple. The Bazamardhi had finished a couple of hours ago, so there wasn't as much of a crowd as it would have been, and I easily found my friend, Vishal. "Hi," I greeted him as I walked up close to him. He looked confused. "It's me, Aditya," I added. He looked even more confused at that, but soon began to recognize me, and his eyes widened in shock. "Yeah, I know. It's why I'm here," I said before he could reply. "Dude, how?" he asked, his voice low, as if he couldn't believe what was going on. "I'll tell you everything. Let's just meet whoever we came to meet," I said. We entered the temple premises, but instead of going to the shrine itself, turned and started to walk towards the office buildings, past the mass of people. Devotees thronged the temple all throughout the day, so keep in mind when I say that there wasn't much of a crowd. I do mean by Indian standards. Vishal kept looking over his shoulders at his suddenly aged friend. "Buddy, you have no idea," I thought. We were met by a shirtless man in a saffron dhoti, who took us to one of the bigger offices in the building. I guess he was one of the main pujaris here, based on off of the respect the others were giving him. He asked us to sit down and offered us water, which we gratefully accepted. Vishal introduced me as his batchmate, and I closely watched the pujari for his reaction. He didn't look at all shocked, and that was a relief. "So, how can I help you, Aditya?" he asked. I didn't say anything, just pulled out my camera from my bag and I showed him that video. Vishal jumped up and walked over to the pujari's side to get a better look. They watched the video in silence, Vishal showing much more emotions on his face than the pujari. "Is this real?" Vishal asked after the video ended. "Is this real?" I replied, pointing at my face, and he solemnly nodded. "Wow, so this isn't like video editing or something?" he asked, amazed. I pointed at my face again. "Does this look like... Okay. He cut me off. "I get it already. Wow." "Listen, Aditya," the pujari said. "We get a lot of requests about things like this. Most of them are just superstitious people who's misdiagnosed a mental illness. But this is something else. Can you help me?" I asked hopefully. "No, I cannot," he shook his head. "Let's just say it's not my area of expertise." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I thought that I was moving forward, but here I was, back to square one. I felt the weight of all 50 plus years of my life on my chest. "But," the priest added, "I know someone who can. Mahakal must be on your side, because that somebody happens to be here today. Let me call him. Please, wait here." Hope began to build inside of me again, but I controlled it. There was no guarantee that this person could help me. No sense in getting my hopes up and then just getting them dashed again. Vishal started pestering me about my situation, but I told him to wait. I said I'll tell him when the pujari comes back. No sense in recounting my trauma again and again. We sat in an awkward silence, with Vishal occasionally glancing at me in wonder, for about 15 minutes before the pujari walked back in with another man behind him. This guy was younger than me. I mean younger than my 26-year-old self. Dressed in green kurta and jeans, with a tattoo of a trident piercing a crescent moon smack dab in the middle of his forehead. He looked like an edgy college student who worshipped Shiva only because it was edgy, and probably even was. But he certainly didn't look like the kind of man who would be of assistance to me. But then again, looks can be deceiving. He shook my hand, pulled a chair and he sat down next to us. "This is Rocky," the Pujari said. "At least that's what he's known as. He has some experience in this field." Rocky nodded. "So, what's wrong?" he asked, and I showed him the video. Does this look like anyone you know?" he asked after watching it. "What? No," I replied. He sighed. "So, what happened after this video? How did you end up like this?" He pointed at me. I launched into my story. I told them everything that had happened to me, from the doll to the nighttime visit, to the last night's incident with Nanny. "Your nanny is dead?" Vishal asked, amazed. "Yes, I mean maybe, I don't know," I answered truthfully. "Maybe I had dreamt it all up, and he had kidnapped her or something." Verbalizing this makes me sound like a lunatic. "Wow," Vishal said. "So, can you help me?" I asked Rocky. "No," he answered. "Well, shit. To be precise, no one can," he added, his brow furrowed, making the trident shift in a bizarre way. "I know what this thing is. See, when I first saw the video, I thought it was a skinwalker because of the eyes. No, I hope that it was a skinwalker, because that at least I can deal with, and that has weaknesses that we can exploit. But when you told me about your grandmother, this is a pisage. At least I now knew what was haunting me, and that's progress." "A pisage has no weaknesses," Rocky continued. "It's a very powerful, immortal creature. It feeds off the souls of its victims, like a vampire, if you will." He rubbed his trident. "There are only a handful of them that we know of. The last one that our people encountered was back during the emergency days. Nothing works in this thing. We can't kill it, we can only slow it down." "How?" I asked softly. "By eliminating its food source and containing it," he replied in a matter-of-fact way. "Excuse me," I exclaimed. "You wanted to know how to do it. I'm telling you," Rocky pointed out. "As long as it has people it can feed off of, it'll continue to find idiots like your grandmother to manipulate and fatten itself." "Rocky, you're being rude," the Pujari chastised him. "So you can't do anything?" Vishal asked. "I didn't say I wouldn't do anything," Rocky said. "Look, all I'm saying is that we can try to stop this thing, but you have to be aware of the fact that you probably won't make it out alive." I shuddered, but I nodded. "How do we go about this?" I asked. "We find out where it lives and we attack it there," Rocky answered. "See, what do you do when you're starving?" I shook my head, not knowing where he was going with this. "You stretch out your food supplies," he continued. "And I'm guessing that's what he's been doing to your nanny, or any other poor suckers that it had managed to ensnare in its trap in the past. If it has so many people, why does it need me?" I asked. "You're alive, fully so, that's why," he replied. "You think there are other people like me being slowly killed by him?" I wondered. "I doubt it. Your video shows that it usually takes him the better part of a night to feed. I guess it's slow because he expends energy to feed as well," Rocky said. "So how do we find out where he lives?" I asked. "We put you to sleep. Wait for him to come and feed on you and track him back to his home," he said with a straight face. "No," I protested. "I can't fall asleep again. Look what happened to me the last time that I slept. There's no way I'll survive it again. I'll be close by, Rocky said. I'll wake you up before he can take too much of your life. What if you don't get to me on time? I asked. I warned you that this was risky, Rocky replied. What do you think would happen here? We would chant some mantras and give you a magical weapon to slay the monster. It doesn't work that way. You have to make sacrifices. I grit my teeth but nodded, albeit indignantly. We decided to put our plan into motion that evening, giving Rocky time to make some preparations. I thanked the Pujari and said my goodbyes to Vishal, though he protested, but I wasn't having any of it. He was getting married in less than a month. There's no way that I would have his death on my conscience. He finally relented after I agreed to keep in touch and to call him if I needed anything. I also spoke to my parents, telling them that everything was okay and that the phone conversations we had about the dolls were nothing important. I have never been a very religious man, always sitting on the fence between theism and atheism, but I decided to spend the day visiting various religious places in the city anyway, having my lunch at the local Gurdwara. It felt a lot like I was wrapping up my business in this world and preparing to die, but regardless, I was a lot calmer by the time evening rolled on, and as I checked into one of the seedier hotels that Rocky had picked, I felt somewhat at peace. Why this place? I asked. The police will just be a distraction at this point, he said. It's better to choose a place they won't quickly visit. As we had our dinner, we went over the modalities of the plan. We weren't going to follow him in his car all the way back to his place. We just wanted the number plates. Those could then be used to find out what identities he was using, properties registered to that name, and to raid those properties all at once and blow them up. It was risky, yes, but we couldn't let him know we were planning on doing something as balls out as invading his home. He could shift his base at the slightest whiff of danger, and then I would be screwed. I marveled at the scale of it all. How could this young man be sitting in front of me, possibly be running, be a part of something capable of pulling this off? But I didn't want to bite the hand that was going to feed me, and so I wisely kept my mouth shut. After dinner, I made my way to my room, casually looking for where the cameras were hidden. Rocky caught me doing that and told me to stop. We parted ways in front of my room. He was staying in the room next to me, and assured me that he would immediately jump in to help if he sees anything strange on the camera, like a hungry pisage. So there I was again, flat on my back, looking up at another ancient ceiling fan, waiting to fall asleep. I swear to God, if I survived this, beds would end up becoming PTSD triggers for me. Of course, it took me a long time to fall asleep. That old stereotype of old people being quick sleepers wasn't as of yet true for me. I wondered if I would even wake up, and I hoped that Rocky would get revenge for me if I didn't. Such morbid thoughts were swirling around in my head when I slowly drifted off to sleep. It was some trashy Kumar Sanu song being played at full volume on speakers that I hadn't even noticed. That woke me up. Feeling extremely groggy, I opened my eyes to see that face again, just inches from mine. His mouth was turned into this vicious snarl, shining eyes glaring daggers at me, trying to pierce my very soul. His breath was foul. It smelled like death. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. He brought one of his long, clawed hands up and began choking me. He was furious. Did he figure out what we were planning? Or was this just anger at having his meal interrupted? I thrashed around, clawing at his arms, but he held on. I heard banging on the door. It sounded like Rocky was trying to force his way in. A loud bang later and the door gave in, and light from the hallway outside came pouring in. Rocky walked in with a shotgun that he aimed at the Pisach. The monster turned around and snarled at my rescuer. Rocky opened fire, the shotgun shells passing harmlessly through the monster's body and slamming into the wall behind him. I coughed as air rushed into my lungs. The Pisach gave me one last look and casually just walked into and out of one of the side walls, maintaining eye contact with Rocky, who was carefully following his each and every movement. "You okay?" Rocky asked after a good 30 seconds. "Yeah," I said, a little shaken but fine. How long was I out? 25 minutes. I set off the alarm as soon as I saw him walk in. He replied. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "Did we get the number plates?" Rocky nodded. I felt so goddamn happy. Finally, I put that thing on the back foot for the first time. "Next time I see you, it's going to be me walking into your bedroom." I did not want to take this job. Coming back after dealing with a particularly nasty deity on rapport, I was really looking forward to a break, something that I hadn't had in over a year, when Guruji called me for another job. I knew this was going to be trouble as soon as I saw the video, and it only became worse when I realized that I was dealing with a goddamn Pisha. At some level, I felt sorry for the poor bastard sitting in front of me. Losing over half your life in the span of a few days is not something anybody should go through. But while I did sympathize with him, I was not an emotional fool. I was pragmatic enough to understand that he would most likely die trying to take this monster down. Believe me, having this type of clarity in this line of work can mean the difference between your own life and death. So while some of you may think that I'm an asshole, I don't care at the least bit, as long as my work is done. "So why Ranchi then?" he asked with a confused expression on his face. "It makes the most sense," I replied. "Of the 3 properties we traced to your sleep time buddy, this was the most recent purchase. It's a farmhouse in the ass end of nowhere, a perfect hiding spot, and it happens to be near the same city where you started your job." "But we'll be hitting all 3? He asked and I nodded. "And we'll need you to go back to your house in Ranchi," I said. "That way we'll make him go back to his base and we'll hit him there." "So I'm acting as bait again." He was offended but also a little scared. "Yes," I nodded, "but you won't be sleeping this time. So rest assured you won't have to worry about losing any more years." Aditya didn't look convinced, and that didn't surprise me at all. He didn't have a lot of years. One more slip and the Pisach would suck the life right out of him. "One more thing," I continued. "Keep in mind that when we're raiding his hideout, you would be a threat to him and not just food. He won't go easy on you this time. But he will avoid killing you, and that's something I won't hesitate to use to my advantage." "He was going easy on me this whole time?" he asked mockingly. Always with the sarcasm. Asshole. "Well, you're about to find out, aren't you?" I replied sweetly. "Here, take this," I said, handing him a pill. "What is it?" he questioned. "Modafinil," I replied. "Take this at around 2 or 3 a.m. It'll keep you awake." A couple of hours later, Aditya left for Indore, from where he would take a flight to Ranchi, and I would follow him on the next plane. We wanted to give this illusion to the Pisach that our partnership had ended and that Aditya was going back after having given up on trying to fight. Who knows how effective our little ruse will be? We had to take that chance though. If there was even the slightest possibility that would improve our chances, we had to do it. Besides, I had a couple of things to take care of in the meantime. I made some phone calls and arranged for some weapons to be made available on Ranchi itself. Transporting guns from here would have taken too long, and it would be too risky with the government breathing down hard on the necks of any smugglers. I then arranged for some kidnappers and such from the surrounding area. Yes, you heard that right. Kidnappers, gangsters, etc. Our people regularly work with criminal elements and use them as meat shields against monsters. It keeps us safe. It saves lives of innocent people, weakens the monsters, and cleans our streets at the same time. They are never told what exactly they're attacking, and most die in the process. It's questionable from an ethical standpoint, especially when you're a communist, but highly efficient. The sky was a pale shade of blue when my plane landed in Ranchi. Delhi's poisonous smog had shifted east and made its way here, keeping visibility low. I was just glad that my flight hadn't been delayed. That would have been a big problem. I had a light breakfast at the airport itself and then took a cab to Aditya's house where I found him right outside, looking exasperated as he tried to reason with the 30-odd men who were camped outside. He threw his hands up when he saw me. "Who the hell are all these people?" he demanded. "They wouldn't say anything at all." "Friends," I replied. "Friends?" His brow furrowed in suspicion. I nodded and I walked over to speak to my contact here. Aditya buzzed around me like an agent bee, pestering me with questions while I inspected my weapons. I held up a 9mm pistol. "You know how to use this?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "They taught us the basics at the academy." "Alright then," I said, looking at our little band. "Let's go." It took us over an hour to reach the farmhouse, with Aditya staying silent the entire time, probably contemplating his life and probable death. I was fine with that. The less distractions before a job, the better. The fog had cleared by the time we had reached the Pisach's base, a quaint little farmhouse that could serve as a rich family's vacation home in happier times. But now, it was hiding the worst sort of nightmares known to man. We parked our cars some distance from the building, trying to avoid being seen. I got out of the car, put the sling of my rifle around my shoulder, and went to speak to my contact, with Aditya staying on my heels. My contact, a man named Lucky, here was much like me. Early 20s with a tattoo of the trident and crescent on his forehead. "We're ready," I told him. "Send them in." He nodded and he barked some orders at the low-life criminals who set off running towards the house, armed with their 303s. Lucky then came jogging back and shook my hand. "It's all yours now," he said. "I'm off." And with that, he got in his car and he left. "Wait," Aditya said. "Won't we need that car? How are we going to fit that many people in the other cars?" I didn't say anything, and I continued to focus on the farmhouse. They were at the front door now, and my heart was beating quickly. It would start any second now. "Oh no," Aditya spoke from beside me. "You don't expect them to make it out of this alive, do you? Holy shit." I shushed him, and we waited in silence as our team entered the building. A couple of tense minutes passed and nothing happened as our criminal friends searched the building. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe our plan didn't work and the Pisach was smarter than we thought and chose not to take the bait. If not here, I hope that he was at the other two sites, because if not, I have no idea how to proceed from there on. Would we have to ask Aditya to sleep again? And then what? Attack him the moment that he comes to feed? It's too risky. Luckily, my chain of thoughts were cut off by loud, painful screaming coming from inside of the farmhouse. "Oh shit," Aditya whispered nervously. My hunch was correct. That arrogant asshole was here. He probably thought that he could take us all out at his home turf. Gunshots followed as the criminals started to battle the pisach. I imagine they were in for a heck of a surprise. They thought they were attacking some hapless middle-aged businessman, and not a soul-sucking demon from hell. A loud explosion ripped through the air, shaking the earth as shards of glass broke out from one of the windows, and bright orange flames leapt into the air, licking at the bright sunny sky. More screaming followed. "All right," I said, tapping Aditya on his arm. "Let's go." "Are you crazy?" He looked at me wide-eyed. "You want me to go into the middle of that?" I began moving towards the building, keeling my gun on my shoulder and a finger next to the trigger. I heard Aditya shuffling behind me, and in seconds, he was close to me. "You think they got him?" he whispered. I didn't give him an answer, and I don't think he expected one either. We saw one of the criminals come tumbling outside, covered in blood, looking shell-shocked. And the next second, he was pulled back inside with terrifying speed, and Aditya yelped from behind me. "I thought it'd be weaker in the day," he whispered. "Shut the hell up," I admonished him. "Sorry, I talk when I'm nervous," he blabbered. "Shut up anyway," I repeated. I told him that the thing had no weaknesses. Should have paid attention in class. A terrifying silence had descended on the area by the time we had reached the door, our breathing and the slightest crunch of the gravel underneath our shoes being the only sound that we could hear. I began sweating. Surely, they couldn't have been taken out this quickly. Had I underestimated his strength? Regardless, we had come too far to turn back now. I slowly walked inside the open door and I took in my surroundings. Bullet holes in the walls, blood splattered everywhere, tables and chairs thrown around, and heat coming in waves from one of the rooms in the back that had witnessed an explosion. The house looked like a war zone. But the most disturbing thing were the bodies. It was a ghastly scene with limbs strewn here and there, and the stench of burnt flesh heavy in the air. I walked straight ahead, carefully clearing every room one after the other, but I found no sign of the pisach. I was wondering where he had run off to when I heard Aditya calling for me. "Hey, check this out." His voice was coming from back in the living room. "One of them is alive." Impossible. I had just come from there and I hadn't seen any sign of movement. I quickly made my way back and found him hunched over one of the wounded criminals, who was twitching wildly. "Step back, Aditya," I warned him. "You're too close." Before he could move away, the wounded man snarled and bit Aditya's left hand with all his might, making him scream. I tried to get a shot off, but I didn't have a clear line of sight, so I moved in closer. Aditya's screaming got louder as the man bit harder, drawing blood and piercing flesh. There was a sickening crunch as he bit so hard that Aditya's bone shattered, making me afraid that he would pass out. The man shook his head wildly, like a starving dog with a juicy bone, trying to bite the hand clean off, and it looked like he was succeeding. I moved in, took out my pistol, and shot the rabid monster in the head. Once, twice. But he held on with unnatural strength, refusing to let go. Aditya's hand now hung on loosely from his wrist, and he screamed even harder. Not knowing what else to do, I took out my knife and I swung it with all my might, slicing Aditya's hand clean off, and then I shoved him aside before emptying my gun into the monster's head. That thing finally stopped moving and I sighed in relief. I quickly moved over to Aditya's side and I cauterized his wound. It was a miracle that he was still conscious. What a tough dude. He was wincing in pain, but he seemed otherwise fine. I made him sit on one of the many bullet-riddled chairs. After that, I picked up a shotgun lying on the floor, and I went around destroying the brains of the criminals lying dead at various places around the house. I wasn't going to give the pisach another chance at pulling something like this again. Aditya had tied a belt around his stump by the time that I circled back to him. Like I said, tough. I was getting impressed with him. "You find him?" he asked, his teeth gritting in rage and pain. I shook my head. I had searched every nook and cranny of this place, but he wasn't here. There was only one place that he could be. "There must be a basement or something," Aditya suggested. "There is a trapdoor outside of the kitchen. It's the only place that I haven't looked," I said. "Okay," he grunted. "Let's go." "You okay? You still want to come?" I asked. His eyes hardened, and I knew that was the only answer I was going to get from him. I wrenched the trapdoor open and saw that a rickety old ladder led down a dimly lit path. At least it wasn't completely dark. I mused as I began my descent. After reaching the tiled floor, I hoped Aditya climbed down as well. This is it, I thought. The final stage. The basement was big, much bigger than I had expected. Its total floor area must have been more than the house I was sitting under. "Whoa," Aditya whispered as he took in the sight in front of him. Rows upon rows of hospital beds lay in front of us, being illuminated by lamps hanging over them intermittently. On these beds were the shriveled up husks of the Pisha's past victims that he was forcibly keeping alive to feed off of. I don't know how much energy they gave him, but they certainly made for a disturbing sight with tubes sticking out of their decaying bodies. If we destroyed these, it'll be pretty much game over. "Do you think my Nani is here too?" Aditya asked. I looked at him. Tears were running down his tired face. "Listen," I said. "You can't empathize with these people. They aren't alive, you understand. This isn't even euthanasia. Euthanasia might have gray areas, but this doesn't." He nodded. I brought up my rifle and I began killing those who had been tortured by this thing for possibly hundreds of years. The muzzle of my gun flashed as more and more of his food supply was erased. I stopped when I heard furious growling. "Where is he?" Aditya asked. "Where are you?" he shouted. I heard rustling from above us, and I looked up and saw a pair of shining eyes gazing down at me from the darkness above. I pulled the trigger, but my bullet sailed harmlessly through his body and smashed into the ceiling as he leapt down at me and began slashing away with his vicious claws, slicing away huge chunks of my flesh. I tried to fight him off, but he was even stronger than I was, and I was slowly losing. He bit a chunk off my shoulder when Aditya wobbled over. He made a solid kick at the ribs of this asshole, but his leg just passed through the Pisha's body, and he slipped, falling hard on his ass. The Pisha snarled and growled and made his way over to his favorite meal, giving me some time to breathe. I was losing far too much blood, far too quickly. We needed to end this fast. I tried to get up, but my head began to swim and I fell down to the floor. My vision became blurry and I started blinking furiously to clear it. I heard a loud thunk and with my hazy vision, saw that Aditya had been struck on the head with some sort of blunt object and was now knocked out. The Pisha was hunched over him, preparing to suck the life out of him. Shit. If he succeeds, he'll regain whatever energy we had worked so hard to drain from him, and I would most certainly die here. There was only one thing I could do in this situation. With trembling hands, I searched for my pistol. The Pisha began to suck. I really needed to frickin' hurry. My heart jumped in jubilation as my hand fell on my gun. Yes, I can still do this. I took that gun and I aimed it at Aditya's head. My vision was still hazy. My hands were trembling. I was terrified that I would miss. If I didn't land a perfect shot, the Pisha would come over to finish me off and then go back to its meal. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the trigger. A shot rang so loudly my ears began to ring, but I knew that it had connected because the Pisha screamed in murderous rage. It was not over. I might have stopped him from rejuvenating himself, but I still hadn't taken him down. He turned his wrathful gaze at me and walked over towards me, fully intent on finishing me off. I aimed the gun at him and I pulled the trigger. My heart sank as the gun clicked, but no bullet shot out. This is it. This is how I was going to die. Doing a job that I didn't want to take with no one in this world to mourn my death. But I wasn't going out without a struggle. That just wasn't who I was. I began to fight him off with everything I had, even though I knew I was going to lose. I don't really know whether it was my bullet that woke him up, or it was just his insane willpower. At the time, I thought that I had killed Aditya, but my bullet had merely hit him on the arm from which I had separated a hand earlier. He got up on his feet and he started walking towards us, a baseball bat in hand, while I continued to struggle against the pisage. Aditya stood over us, took a deep breath, and swung the bat with all of his might. Our efforts at tiring the monster out finally succeeded, as the bat connected with a satisfying crunch. Aditya didn't stop. He continued to swing his mighty hammer of death again and again and again, until the monster's head was nothing but a gooey mess. Aditya wobbled over on his feet, but steadied himself and then he bent towards me. I thought he was going to help me up, but no. He picked up my rifle and aimed it at the pisage's body, and emptied the clip one bullet at a time. He then began kicking the thing's body, pushing himself beyond the point of exhaustion. "Stop," I coughed. "It's over, he's dead." 20 minutes later, Aditya was sitting on the hood of my car, beaten, shot, and mutilated, but still somehow conscious, while I lifted his grandmother's body into the trunk. His face was even more worn now. He easily looked like he was in his late 50s. "So what are you going to do with him?" he asked, pointing at the rucksack containing the remains of the pisage. "Burn it," I replied, "and then bury the ashes under a ton of cement." He nodded. He looked old but relieved, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders, which it of course had. "How are you perfectly fine?" he asked. "I saw you. He hurt you worse than me, and yet here you are, walking around like nothing had happened." I didn't say anything. "How did you cauterize my wound?" he asked, pointing at his stump. "Sure, keep your frickin' secrets," he muttered. "Try to kill me but won't even tell me the truth." "So what are you going to do now?" I asked. "Go back to your old life?" He shook his head. "I can't. There's no way to reasonably explain this." "Late onset progeria?" I suggested. He laughed bitterly. "No," he said. "I can't let my parents see me like this. No parent should have to watch a child die, least of all in this manner. I need a clean break." An idea began to form in my head. "Hey," I said, "why not come work with us?" "Seriously?" he laughed. "My body can't handle any more of this." "Not field work," I corrected him. "We need help with the office, or the administrative work. We'll give you a new identity, and give your old self a clean death." Hope began to form in his eyes. "You don't have to say yes now," I assured him. "Just think about it while you recuperate." We both turned our heads as we saw a car approaching us. It was an ambulance owned by someone our people had helped in the past. "Thank God," I said. "I really need to rest." He nodded. "I can't wait to be in bed," I added. "Screw that," Aditya exclaimed. "I'm never going anywhere near a bed again for the rest of my life, however short it might be." And with that, we both began to laugh.